little what they're doing in terms of projects and the way they run. Definitely keen to see what David's been able to do in his time here. It will then be followed by Mike Meyer, who will present on cybersecurity for school boards. Definitely something I think, school boards definitely need to be aware of and seeing what they're doing in the future. We'll then have a quick morning tea break, which will be back down in the quad. Coffee and food will be there available for you. And then we'll come back after that. I'll hand it over to David. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim. And look, welcome to everyone to Loreto Normanhurst. And thanks for coming to us today and joining us here. Before we begin, let's acknowledge the land and the people on which we gather. We pay our respects to this ancient land that breathed life for 300 million years. A land that extends from the ridgeline of the Blue Mountain across the sandstone plateau to the coast into the ocean. These ridgelines are the water catchment areas. It's where the rain hits first, flows down to our rivers and creeks, rejuvenating the earth and filling waterholes and hanging swamps. A land kissed by rainbows and home to the tall blue gums. We acknowledge this land as mother to possums, lyrebirds, the laughing kookaburra, the tawny frogmouth and brush turkey. We recognise the deep cultural and spiritual connection of First Nations people to country. We honour elders past, present and emerging. And we pay our respects to all Torres Strait and Aboriginal Island peoples within our community. Just a brief bit of housekeeping. All our sessions will be held up here in this space. As Tim mentioned, morning tea, lunch is all back down in what we call the Mary Ward quad. In the case of emergency, the normal whoop, 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 etc. And our assembly area is down on the oval, which is just past the registration area. So keep heading south. Just around amenities, the back of this room we've got a few toilets for females here. There's a unisex toilet on the ground floor of the Mary Ward quad. The men's toilets, there's toilets on this level. If you just go straight out this door, keep walking straight until you hit a wall and they'll pass a couple of sets of toilets. Also on level 2, another sets of toilets. So to get there from Mary Ward quad is just up the steps around the coffee cart is the easiest way in case it's raining rather than walking up through the spaces. And as Tim mentioned, our sponsors are also down in the registration area. Please find time to drop into them and to see them today. As a Catholic organisation, we commence events with a prayer. Loreto Normanhurst has 5 key values: sincerity, verity, justice, felicity and freedom. And each year the school focuses on a particular value. 2024 is a year of sincerity, and this is our sincerity prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, lead us as we journey to know our true selves, to have the courage to act from love and not fear, to ensure our words match our actions, and to celebrate our unique gifts. Inspired by Mary Ward, may we recognise the divine in ourselves and in others. May we support each other to the people of authenticity and integrity, who generally try to make the world better for others. May we strive to develop our God-given potential as we build community strengthened by our differences and united by our sincerity. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord, in unity with the Holy Spirit. Amen. Great, here we go. Okay, so Loreto Normanhurst commenced in 1987 in the tradition of Mary Ward, who lived over 400 years ago. Loreto Normanhurst is part of Loreto Ministries, covering the Loreto schools of Australia, but also part of the wider international Loreto community. It was established as a country girls' boarding school for girls of all ages. In the 1980s, it moved to focus on years 7 to 12 only. And then in 2015, we commenced years 5 and 6, although year 5 and 6 was just for day students, and it remains that way till today. Currently, there's over 1,200 students in years 5 to 12, and we have over 200 boarders here at the school. We have around 250 permanent staff and another 300 casual and peripatetic staff. Early last week, we officially commenced a new boarding school project, a major building work which the idea started around 30 years ago. This will provide much needed space and updated boarding facilities and scheduled to be open in 2026. Okay. The IT team at Loreto Normanhurst consists of 9 staff. We have a managed service agreement with NetStrategy, who provides 6 permanently on-site staff members and a full range of support via the NetStrategy head office. The on-site team consists of a service delivery manager, 2 system and network admins, 2 help desk staff, and a DBA or information systems officer. The 3 Loreto staff consist of myself, a client service or print room officer who is here 4 days a week during term time, and an AV technician who commenced around 8 weeks ago. Since my time at the school, the AV events were outsourced to 45 Productions, and we'll continue to engage them for events that require more than 1 technician or equipment that the school doesn't have. The IT office is located at the centre of the school and literally just across on this level, the quad over here. It's open from 7:15 till 5 during term and 8 to 5 during non-term time. We're very fortunate to have a substantial footprint in terms of space, as the school is constantly trying to be more and more creative with available rooms. Just don't trust the clicker. We have 2 main server rooms. The first is part of the IT office and contains a primary internet connection, firewall and backup server. The second server room is located on this side of the building on level 2 and houses our Nimble storage and HP ESX servers. Space is a premium at the school, and as I said, we're very fortunate to have as much space as we do. We also have a smaller server room located in the primary school, which has previously held the backup server and tape drive. Our internet connection is a 10 gig connection with ARNet, and we previously had a secondary microwave link, but recently moved to a 1 gig NBN connection. Our firewall is Fortinet, and we utilise Extreme Core and Edge switches. We're currently in the progress of migrating all our switches across to Fabric. Most locations are connected via fibre. We have 1 remaining point-to-point link. And we have about 50 active VLANs running across the school, covering a range of areas, including both trusted and untrusted networks. One of the major Christmas projects this year was to replace our access points as we moved from Aruba to Extreme. And we have around about 165 access points spread across the school. We have full SAN replication with the global switch data centre, and with the exception of our security cameras. And the SAN is up for renewal at the end of 25, and we're looking at viable options. Our strategy is cloud-based, and as systems come up for renewal, we look towards more cloud hosting or SaaS options. We currently run around 35 virtual servers, covering a range of file systems, SQL servers, and dedicated application servers. We use Barracuda Cloud Backup for our O365, and very recently moved to tape backup into the cloud with Veeam and using Wasabi. Our next challenge is what to do with over 1,000 tapes currently sitting at Iron Mountain. In terms of devices, we are primarily a Windows school for staff and students, with a 1-to-1 program across year 5 to 12. Primary students have been predominantly using iPads, and they've now moved to a Surface Go this year, although we still have 1 remaining year of iPads. And secondary students have a laptop for use. The laptops have a 3-year lifespan, and so we sort of change them with an accidental damage policy of 1 repair per year per device. We were a Dell school for many years, but the model purchased in 2023 is struggling to meet standards, and we moved to HP EliteBooks in 2024. These are generally working well. All our Windows devices are managed by Intune, and once we finish with the iPads this year, we'll move all of the remaining iOS devices across into Intune as well. Staff devices are refreshed every 3 years, and they are the same device that we give to students. In terms of classroom AV, we use Vivi. We have around 120-25 Vivi units across the school, and although there's backup for HDMI, most of our teaching staff all use Vivi connected through the classroom. Over the years, interactivity has been trialled, but not really embraced. And finally, our printing is with Canon. We have a print room. We don't have a print room, so all staff have access to the photocopiers. Our large print jobs, such as exams or booklets, are performed by a print officer, with any major print production requests being outsourced. This is a snapshot of our primary applications used across the school. It's by no means exhaustive, and while we have some integrations, there's a lot of work to be done to ensure the data is flowing accurately and timely across applications. There's a number of manual processes, not to mention the need to have that consistent access levels for all staff across applications. It's no easy feat, and work to be done in that space. It's amazing how many applications are used by the school, and this adds to the range of complexities. Over time, the number of applications grow and only a few get retired. Trying to explain to staff that the proposed application will not be implemented can be challenging. While it may solve their problem and provide some efficiencies, the applications need to meet the security and specific criteria of the school. We need to ensure all necessary procedures and processes are in place before the deployment. Our SIS is central, cloud-based, and the enterprise version. This was implemented in 2020. We utilise a lot, but not all of the features. This year, after 5 years, we've undertaken a review on each of the modules to determine the extent of which they are used. This includes what was promised 5 years ago and still not delivered, and what additional features have been added which we are not using. Tracking capabilities and within the consistently changing economic information technology landscape means it's never a set and forget proposition. Our M365 ecosystem involves Outlook, OneDrive, connected to all staff and student devices, Teams and SharePoint. We have a cloud-based SharePoint intranet site, and we very recently moved away from Zoom and only last week used Teams for the first time to host our online parent-teacher interviews. Other key applications include Dynamics for Finance, Canvas is our LMS and Timetabler for timetabling. We use Reachboarding in the boarding school and Enroll HQ to manage our enrolments. Clipboard for extracurricular, Elmo, our HRIS, EdSmart, and then our primary, I suppose, finance systems are School Easy Pay, and we also use FlexiSchools. But we do have around 10 payment gateways, which adds layers of complexity for the finance team. Next term, we'll be releasing a new parent portal, an app, which is designed to make life simpler for our parents by combining a range of associated applications across the school. Our security software includes Sentinel-1 for staff and Sophos for students. We utilise Qualys for patch and vulnerability management and Netrix for access and identity management. We're planning a range of major projects in the coming, underway and also in the coming year and moving into next year. And they're all important as they tend to utilise the similar resources, which are always in short supply. We're working on application and data mapping, understanding the integration between applications, ensuring data accuracy and consistent access, managing the supply chain and ensuring vendors and products are secure as possible. Data classification is another area. Defining the levels of data and classifying data across the school when it's never been done before will be interesting. Substantial change management will be involved. Record management is something I've been working on since I've been here in the last 2.5 years. The retention and destruction of documents. It's a major undertaking, and I know lots of schools are working in this space as well. And we've got to consider our digital and our paper records in that process. And then there's a little thing called AI, just to keep us on our toes. What and how best to implement this capability across the school is also on the radar, combining the business, the education and the teaching of how best to use it, and really doing a lot of, I suppose, work and investigation to try and get some clarity as to how best to proceed. In terms of our cyber journey, once the central implementation was bedded down, the focus moved into the security area. It was well supported and is well supported by the principal and the board. A proposal in collaboration with NetStrategy was presented to the board at the start of 2023, with the decision to undertake the recommendation of utilising NIST to drive improvements within cybersecurity. Very simplistically, NIST consists of 5 components: identify, protect, detect, respond and recover, each with having a rank between 1 and 5, 1 being the lowest, and each measuring the level of cybersecurity maturity within the organisation. The recommended involved a 3-year plan with reviews yearly to track progress and then provide the next set of security initiatives to be actioned in the coming months. Our goal is to reach a rating of between 3 and 4. Between 3 and 4 for each component. With a decision made as an initial review was undertaken to provide a benchmark. Goals and milestones were then proposed and a series of projects outlined for the first year. These projects included the implementation of MFA, data and application mapping, the installation of software for access and patch management, and these projects were then scheduled across the course of the year. However, plans can change quickly, and as I'll share shortly, timeframes can change as well. In terms of NIST, these were our scores and our targets. You'll notice the baseline score is low, but it's consistent with other schools and similar organisations who are beginning the journey. The targets given were stretch targets, and we do our best to achieve them within the planned timeframes. As mentioned, we're not aiming to reach any higher than a 4. We're a school, not a defence or financial organisation. And these targets do contain stretch areas. Projects that rely on skills, budgets and resources, with the support of the school leadership and board, we are heading in the right direction. NIST provides a solid framework on which to build. We had goals in 2023, but things don't always go to plan. We missed some targets and surpassed others, and in the process reducing our risk and constantly improving our systems, network and environment. A lot of work has been done and will continue to be undertaken. It involves substantial cost and commitment from the school. However, in the current landscape, it's critical. Our 2024 cybersecurity projects include a focus on policy and procedures, cybersecurity critical incident management planning, data logging, data classification, and vendor supply chain management. As part of the IT overview, I thought it apt to share our cyber incident, which occurred in May last year. It started on Monday, May the 15th, with a call to our risk and compliance manager informing them of a ransomware attack on the school systems. It wasn't a tabletop exercise, nor a hoax caller. IT went into overdrive and immediately reached out to NetStrategy as a technical lead, the IAS, and our cybersecurity insurer. The board and leadership were informed and a critical incident was established. Important to note from the outset, the guidance and support provided by Chris Gersh and the NetStrategy team was fantastic. Chris was on speed dial with both myself and the principal, constantly asking questions and seeking advice and guidance. The NetStrategy team went above and beyond to support the school during this incident. The initial IT focus was on the cause and extent of the breach, followed by a range of protection measures. The security project plans, which occurred during the course of 23, went out the window, and what would normally have taken 4 to 6 months to implement suddenly took 2 to 3 weeks. Over the course of the following 3 to 4 weeks, a range of software was installed, such as Sentinel-1, Netrix, and Huntress, across laptops and servers. MFA was implemented, and during the course of the incident, VPN was disabled, and over weekends, non-critical servers were shut down. Throughout the 3 to 4 weeks of the critical incident team was constantly planning and adjusting to the activities, the injections as they occurred. We were informed another Loreto school was also under attack. Our reception staff were getting calls informing of ransomware demands. And there were also other emails to our other systems which also had to be investigated, although these proved to be unrelated. But no stone was left unturned. A whole range of engagements with cybersecurity experts, including school law firms, cybersecurity insurers, and the police were undertaken. A cybersecurity incident is not just a technology issue. Deciding when and what to share with the entire school community is important and needs to be considered. As different events occurred during the time, the decision to inform the parts of the community were taken, along with the type and level of information. Our staff were informed around about day 8. Investigations were constantly ongoing. The IT team was looking for the extent and size of the compromise. How and when it began is important to resolving the issue. However, since the beginning of the incident, we were not able to determine what and where the compromise was. A sample set of files were then published on the dark web, continually implicating Loreto Normanhurst. A complete file tree was also, of all the files that were stolen, was also discovered on the dark web. Ransomware demands were posted and a time frame to pay. No payments were made, so the time frame was extended. Yes, this also happens. Throughout the entire incident, the IT team, along with NetStrategy, could not find any implication of compromise, any indication of compromise. We spent 3 to 4 weeks looking for a needle that was not there. Upon investigation of the sample files and the file tree, we began to realise that, for us at least, it was a case of mistaken identity. The other Loreto school had the breach, although Loreto Normanhurst was a name on the web and the point of the contact for the threat actors. As mentioned, our cyber plan for the year went out the window, and a range of improvements were made during this time. And this incident is continually being referred to in order to ensure the focus remains on improving the cybersecurity posture. Overall, a learning experience, and something I'm not keen to repeat. That concludes my overview. Hopefully you found it interesting. Ah, Mr. Sodhi, of course. Yes, it took about, when we only had the first indication of compromise, right, it took us a while to do the analysis. Again, there was no clear indication even from day one. There was no ransomware on any of our screens. All our systems were operating as normal, okay? The leadership was informed. We formed a critical incident in that space. The board was all informed throughout those periods of time. But because there was no clear indication, it was a real balance of going, do we hit the panic button? Do we tell everybody? There's no data. All our systems were fine. We did a range of investigation through NetStrategy, implementing, checking our logs, and we didn't have a SIEM at that point in time, so it was a lot of manual processing, going through and see what we can do. It wasn't until the next round of, I suppose, calls were coming through, did we go, hang on a second, now we need to tell more people, right? But again, the reception, people were aware, even to that point. No, so we told key people to watch out for these things here, right? If you do get a call, and our risk and compliance manager did what most people would do, got the call and went, holy crap, hang up. And we went, oh, you could have asked more information, right? But that's learning. That's that space of how we sort of try and train that. So no, our reception staff were informed to expect calls. Right, like this whole process was, what happens now? Chris, what happens now? Oh, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. So it was really an interesting exercise. And then to try to go, do we tell staff? But nothing's happening, right? If we can shut down some servers, we'll turn the VPN off. We can only have so much monitoring going on in that space. So yeah, a juggle, in terms of how much we informed our community, our parents and that sort of thing. Again, because we had no indication, it was that balancing act. But we had to tell staff at some point. Mr. Ralph.
There was a great presentation at the AAS conference in May from a cyber security insurer. To what level were you engaged with your insurer, and what did they do to help you?
We engaged our insurer very early on. We got them to provide advice around what NetStrategy were proposing. Working with our law firm as well. We're probably more contained with our law firm because there was no indication of breach. So the cybersecurity went, well, we actually can't do anything. The police went, we can't actually do anything because they're not there. We did engage our cybersecurity, really again from an advice perspective. We're doing this, this and this. Is that okay? Yes, it is, right? Our law firm was probably more heavily engaged around communications and preparing our communications in that space. Although we did engage our cyber experts within the law firm heavily as well in that space. Again, to go, this is what we've got, what's going to happen now? What do we need to do? And because we had no actual implication of that compromise, it was just this grey area. Like I said, we were looking for a needle in a haystack that wasn't there. But no, like engaging the cybersecurity, we rang the AIS and went, what do we need to do? Right, turn on MFA as quick as you can, adjust this, change our IT and our key admin passwords, all right? We didn't get all staff to change their passwords. we didn't get them to sort of hit that panic button as well. So that balance in that space. So our cybersecurity insurer around guidance, what do we do from a comms perspective, validating that against our law firm, and then from a technology perspective going, we're taking this path, we're installing this, we haven't got this on it, so we'll push this out. Is that the right thing to do? Yep, you're doing the right thing. And as those different injections occurred over time, we went, right, now what's happening here? Next place. Look, we were on our NIST journey from early 2023, which was actually, as you look back, very timely. So we had to do those projects through the year. Like, we're very much, we had no real logging. So that space was a initial kickoff in that space. We did a lot of work in those 3 and 4 weeks. And even now we're sort of redoing our Netrix server because it's a rebuild of what we had to do. So those were our projects that we sort of did very quickly, and then a series of consolidation aside from that. And that's why our protect and our detect numbers went up very quickly. Now we're sort of focusing more on the identify stage and realigning those projects. I mean, we had a few other projects already. I think we had anomalous detection software, and then it was determined, no, we won't go down that path in that mix. Did that answer your questions? Sorry. Oh.
This is a very comprehensive framework. It's already used in America. I'm curious as to the essentials data license that does the one. Did you not consider those?
I'm looking over at Chris Gersh. Look, you could use Essential 8, you could use those ones. We just chose a framework. Like I said, we are NetStrategy, they're our managed service provider. They were supportive in that space, and it gave us an overview. See, look, we looked at those very briefly. ISO is quite comprehensive. We weren't prepared to do that level, but we needed something a little bit more, I suppose, contained than the Essential 8 version to sort of try and drive one step after the next. Richard.
I'm just curious about the incident. Who led it? Because often as IT people we expect to lead this. So I'm curious about who led it. How you felt going through this whole process, particularly working with your board of council.
It was interesting. Our principal. Sorry, yes. The question was, who actually led the critical incident? It's a school issue. Our principal was on long service leave, currently in Spain at that point in time, and it even took us a couple of days to go, do we ring her, do we not ring her? The lead of the primary lead was the then principal, currently our deputy, and so she did 90% of the leading, right? I was a conduit between IT and NetStrategy, right? Getting the guys, purely from a technology perspective, all right, we're doing this, yep, we've got to do this, what's change management here? The big part of the critical incident is around communication, around reputational management in that space. Our deputy was heavily involved in a range of conversations with the chief marketing officer preparing those comms, working with the law firms, working with, working in tandem around what are the next steps. So all the business process, and it was led by the principal of the school.
Question is, in terms of the initial breach that led to ransomware, based on the forensics and incident response, how did that initial breach happen?
The initial breach didn't happen at our school.
No, for the ransom, you said it was ransomware.
There was a ransomware note, yes. So what we believe happened was that another school, Loreto School, was attacked and broken. It was the same one, but we got all the communication, right? All for nothing, yeah. But we achieved, like I said, we were never compromised, okay? But that ransomware note referred to a Loreto school, except it wasn't Loreto Normanhurst. And it wasn't until we got to, I think even earlier we go, our systems are solid, we're okay. But until we actually saw the file tree, until we actually got those sample files, we looked at those sample files and went, oh, it's Loreto, but it's not Normanhurst. No more questions?
More about your infrastructure and applications.
Yep.
So, what's your cloud strategy? And the second question is how you, like any other school, you have civil systems, how you integrate and make the systems talk with each other?
So yeah, the question on infrastructure. Look, we have our cloud strategies to move across into cloud. I think before my time, one of those things, as we moved into the SIS, right? Our SIS is in the cloud, managed purely by Central. We look at each application and try and analyse that, going, okay, ideally we want a cloud solution in this space. But we're in that process of going, oh, this product's still okay. Like I said, we still have a SAN here on site. That was put in 3 years ago. It's got this year and next year to run. Looking at options to say, look, ideally, we want to move off in the cloud, right? We are a heavy Microsoft ecosystem, so probably looking very, initial investigations around the Azure web services in that space. Our level of integrations are minimal. We have some integration. We're relying heavily on the vendors in that space to do that integration. I'm very conscious of over-developing lots of bits and pieces because it then becomes very single point sensitive on our DBA and information systems officer to make sure all those handshakings occur. So trying to push those APIs, we are utilising Wand as best as possible and other spaces, but trying to keep our development on site as minimal as possible. Our current parent portal that we're just looking at releasing, that's been in the cloud outsourced with CI marketing as part of the Enroll HQ group to utilise their skills and pull the information from Central, pull information from our Canvas systems in those areas.
Will it be different from the central parent portal?
Yes.
Will you take both of them or just one?
We want to shut down the central parent portal. So we're moving all the things off the central parent portal as best as possible. So our current parent portal will have things like academic reports that they can pull across, our attendance management. We've got a big area around how we manage our medical data and keeping that up to date. There's a few challenges in that space. And we're trying to engage our parents with Canvas more so around how we can get them into part of that reporting and that learning space. So that parent portal pulls in some Canvas data as well. Yeah. It's called Portal HQ. It's part of the suite of products from Enroll HQ or CI Marketing. So Enroll HQ is their main item, but yeah, utilising that capability. Great. All right. Thank you very much. Why don't you just come up here? It's all yours.
Thanks for that, David. That's really thoughtful, and what an interesting journey that you've had there. Certainly what must have been really quite a stressful time for everybody during that moment, and it was really quite interesting to hear that it was quite an all-of-community response that came together to lead and to make that happen. My name is Michael, everybody. Mike is often what people call me. I'm from a company called M31 Consulting, but let's forget the company name. I've been doing technology now in education for 25 years. I started on a help desk all those many moons ago, and over all the years I've probably worked with the vast majority of the schools within New South Wales in some form or another. So it's a delight to be here and a pleasure. You can't hear me? Oh, sorry about that. I've got two microphones, one for the stream and one for that. I'll try and speak up because I do tend to walk around a little bit. Let's see if we've got our slides working here. Are they? There we go. Making it all fit. So let's break out some old tech. This is a little story I've got to share with you. Might have some hallmarks with what it was in Sunday school, if you remember the old felt diagrams. Our boards come together and rally round our organisations to primarily govern and build vision. That's their primary scope of work. And what we're going to talk about today is how does that fit for cybersecurity. So a board, when they get together and start working with a school, they start to lay foundations. And what they do is they build and rally their vision around the principal, and they start putting some building blocks together. They build their approach to education. They jump in there and they delegate tasks and start building educational policies. They give instructions to the principal and they start shaping their vision, goals and aspirations for the school. And they bring it all together. And we have a unique little challenge for boards at the moment, because this thing that seems very little, but to everybody in this room, it's been hanging around for this really long time, cybersecurity. But for some reason, hasn't really necessarily been thought of. And what we as leaders have the opportunity today is to support our boards to make this thing fit. How can we make this fit? And this is where we start to think about it and go, perhaps we can simply start reimagining things. Perhaps we can just slightly think a little bit more creatively. How can we take all these things that have been going on, think about them slightly differently, and by thinking differently, we can make it fit. And that's what a board wants to hear from you. They want to hear your imagination, because what they're interested in doing is working through the principle for that vision and framework and the policies that they're looking to curate, and want to hear from you and build assurance that everything's coming together well. Some important things to note for boards at the moment. The corporate regulator is keen to make an example. This makes a challenge in and of itself. The Australian Corporations Act was changed a few years ago as a result of the Medicare and the Optus breach, and they're both currently being litigated. What that also means is not only has legislation changed, but we're in a situation where we don't really know what the complete outcome of that change is resulting to the landscape in front of us. It's a little bit of an unknown. Penalties can be harsh in this landscape. We know that legislation can have a penalty for up to $50 million. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest for Optus and for Medicare if we found ourselves in a scenario where they're pursued for the full amount. Likewise, some other penalties that you might not be aware of is the failure to notify can be up to $2.2 million. There's some important rules about the mandatory notification reporting. And there's two things that you need to be aware of. One, an organisation's turnover needs to be over $3 million, and on risk assessment, has the breach resulted in a scenario where the information stolen can create a significant negative impact for those affected. On that first point, $3 million, every single person in this room is working with an organisation that's doing a turnover of over $3 million. Which means it's our risk assessment then, working with our lawyers to work out what's then required to substitute a mandatory notification. By all accounts, if we use a wide brush, that's probably every incident ever reported. So that means some of our first courses of action, cybersecurity law firms, are some of the first things you lead with. Legislation has also changed in such a way that there is now personal liability for directors. To clarify, as I'm speaking this morning, when I'm using the phrasing director, I'm using the phrasing director as defined in the Australian Corporations Act. For a board and their board members in non-profit organisations, they are directors. Non-profit organisations do tend to be a little bit different. They could be in the form of an association or a company limited by guarantee. Which means it does get a little bit shaky, but it does mean there's a risk. For those people that are on our boards, they're in a pretty risky position. While the guarantee might be financially not very much, often memberships of the board could simply be $10 or $1 for a non-profit, some figure that doesn't really matter a great deal. But if we're pursued for any reason as successful, they're going to pursue finance and assets. For a non-profit, that could be meaning to liquidate. That could mean real estate, buildings, draining bank accounts to pay for those fines. Quite important to have the cybersecurity in place to respond to some of those things. For a non-profit, however, this becomes even riskier because you can be personally liable. I'm a company director, I can be personally liable. So we need to be able to be in a position of doing something about that because the landscape has changed. We can't just hide behind what has inherently been protections of our corporate structures. One in 5 businesses have been hacked. How many schools have we got represented today? Probably about 30. What's the quick maths on that? How many organisations here that means that have probably been hacked in some form or another? It means people in this room, something's been going on. 82% of all hacks, attacks involve the human element. Just going to let that sink in with you. 82% of attacks involve the human element. I did mention an elephant on the previous slide. We'll come back to that. 82%. 82% of us in the room are probably involved. And as of last year, Australian Cybersecurity Centre, cybercrime costs are up by 14%, with the average cost of remediating some sort of attack in a wide brush, $97,200, 100 grand. If you're a small or medium business, can you even survive that? Just some food for thought. We're going to come back to some of these, so just let these sink in for a little bit. But let's have a moment to have a think about what a board is primarily interested to know. When we deal with the Australian Corporations Act, there's 3 phrases that we deal with. What is reasonable? The due diligence to execute our duty of care. 3 phrases. Reasonable, due diligence, duty of care. Legislation in the Corporations Act for cybersecurity looks a lot like our workplace health and safety changes. So over the past couple of decades, we've seen a lot of the corporations change in their approach to workplace health and safety, the way we manage those different things. Our corporate structures are now treating that the same way. What's significant about that is it's an all-of-community issue. Every single person in our organisation has a role to play, and we're involved in that conversation at the same time. For boards, directors, reasonable due diligence in their duty of care. That's their job. Okay. What's important to understand about this lens is boards do not give 2 hoots that you bought a Palo Alto firewall or a Cisco. They don't care. That's not in their scope of responsibility, is it? Their responsibility is to know that they've executed through their team, through the principal, through the executive. They're taking an interest in executing their reasonableness, due diligence of their duty of care. It's not very technical, is it? But this is the kinds of things that we're going to focus on in this time because we are in the unique position to champion leadership with our boards in such a way that we can support them. And we're going to think about some of those ways because they're interested to know about our programs, our culture, our approach, our policies, and how we keep building that together. And they're going to start taking an interest in it. We don't live in a world where you can simply delegate security to IT and call it done. If you turn around to a board and they say, IT's got it, no, that's negligent. Straight out of the gate. You just can't do it. They have to take an interest. In the same sense that they've taken an interest in their workplace health and safety policies and approach, they're interested in knowing that here in cybersecurity. They care that you have a program that is in place that supports the vision that they've built, supports our box we talked about earlier, a program that is iterative, continues to build, continues to evolve, continues to shape. It continues to understand and resonate the needs of the organisation and is being monitored and regularly updated. This is the kind of information that you can practically bring together and support in your executive reporting to your boards and to your principal that you can do that. There's a couple of things that I talk about to help you along the way in getting some of these strategic components right, because we're talking about strategic at this point. The first strategic area, big fan of knowns, unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. I think this is a really good way that we can really start thinking and wrestling with some of these things. And the first one I like to talk about is this idea of unknowns. In cybersecurity, this is all of our zero-day vulnerabilities. What we don't know. There's always something to that we don't know. What this also means is that you can't have perfect assurance in cybersecurity, does it? Can't be perfect. Something's happening out there somewhere, there's a vulnerability somewhere, something's done, you can't control everything. So there is this place where we sort of have to just simply accept that there is some reality in front of us as well. And a lot of this becomes risk management. Building an appetite for what we start to become aware of and deal with those different situations. And as we deal with these unknowns, we then start to look towards our plans in our strategies. How do we respond? What's our response plans going to be like? How are we going to deal with the worst possible outcome? The one that we're a little bit more familiar with is the known knowns. This is where IT teams are most excellent at technology. If you know it, you can measure it, you can do something about it. This is where the tactical and the technical happen every day. So what boards are interested in taking an interest in your risk management and mitigation, your detailed cybersecurity program, audits, risk assessments, stress testing, budget management, becoming familiar with your digital assets, securing the perimeter, securing your endpoints, making sure that information controls are all in place. This is dealing with the knowns. This is the stuff that we know. And it's important to understand as we deal with the knowns, even though these are the easiest things for us to access and do and respond to, they're still intrinsically important. Still intrinsically important, because something's going to move from the unknown to the known. And this is where we build our repertoire of information that we continue that cycle and get that response into place. What gets a little bit tricky though is dealing with the known unknowns. This is a fellow by the name of Abraham Wold. Who's familiar with this? Has anyone ever seen this diagram before? I had a feeling we had some statistical nerds in the room. This is pretty cool. In World War II, the bombers were coming back damaged. And they thought it would be important to do some analysis to try and work out what would be the best ways to improve armour. And this is a beautiful little paradox. So they looked at the aircraft coming back and they mapped out all the different locations across the wingspans of the aircraft that were being hit. And there's some known knowns. We know that if an engine gets hit, it's likely to see the aircraft fall out of the sky. That's dealing with those kinds of known situations. But they were looking at the situation, and Abraham Wold asked an interesting question. And this is to do with something called survivorship bias. And we tend to do this in cybersecurity a lot. And he asked about what are the planes that didn't come back? They didn't come back from fighting over in Germany. What about those ones? They became intrinsically more difficult to understand what happened there because you couldn't access those aircraft. It would mean crossing into enemy territory to try and work out what did they know or what happened that they weren't too sure about. And what the clever boffins worked out is the areas that weren't being hit were probably the areas that actually needed to be reinforced, not the areas that were being hit. And so there's this great big paradox that happens in this approach to different things that we do. And this is where the risk management comes into it. This is where the creativeness comes into it. This is where the psychology of the human condition starts to come into it. Because this is the kind of area that for all of us, our biggest risks really are. Those things that we think we're going to do. I'd like to sometimes turn around and go, I'm good at this, I'm a good cyber citizen. I got it sorted. I'm not sure that's a good condition for us to be able to take on. We can be well versed at it, but I'm not entirely convinced. I had a circumstance last week, as recent, where someone tried to reach me. And I looked at the email that came in, and gosh, it was interesting. Because someone had actually paid for a legitimate platform, had fully established it, fully legitimately paid for it, for the purpose of trying to access people. A legitimate platform in the cloud. It was only because I wasn't expecting that correspondence that my ears pricked. Yet when I did the technical analysis of it, wow, you'd think 98% of it, right on. One thing gave it away. There was a 0 instead of an O in an email. I thought to myself, hang on a minute, this doesn't sniff right. This is not passing the pub test with me. So I contacted the vendor and said, listen mate, what's going on? I'm not expecting this, but this is your platform, this is legitimate. I spoke to them and said, he goes, oh, let me look into that, hey. Sure enough, heaps of people were being solicited through that platform. And he simply just turned around and said, thanks Mike, thanks for letting me know, it's been shut down. Gets pretty scary out there, some of the different things that can happen. In these known unknowns though, there are some things that we typically do a lot of. This is where our patch management falls into it. That constant moving forward, vulnerability detection, we respond to those different things. And this is where one of those great opportunities really presents ourselves. We start to deal with our culture and our teams. Who remembers that statistic I mentioned earlier? How many percent was involved in the human element of this? Who was that, sorry? 82. Who was that? Hand up. Well observed. Oh, a little present for remembering. And from data, a mystery remains a mystery unless investigated. This is where we get our things like our SIAM and different kinds of things that we can work with to deal with those mysteries, to deal with those paradoxes, to build programs. You'll often hear me talking about our program. Our program is the things that the board wants to hear about. They want to know how you're going, how it's being measured, how you're doing that performance. We need to be careful at the same time because we're also going to use frameworks in this same space. We're going to use ISO 27001, Essential 8, NIST. Yet we need to be really careful of those at the same time. There's a paradox here, isn't there? Because it's some great advice and some great wisdom. But every security analyst will tell you there's still gaps. Which also means that they could be a potential race to the bottom. Because it just becomes a minimum standard at that point, doesn't it? And this is where the culture then starts to come into the team, because when we adopt standards, not only are they really valuable, yet there's something that we need to work towards quickly, because our innovation cycle and our growth cycle then starts again and again and again and again. So what might some of these look like for the board? They're going to start taking an interest in your cyber program. They're going to ask you a little bit about it. Some boards can be a little bit different to other boards. Some boards can have some people that are a little bit hyper technical and like to get a little bit involved in the weeds and just like to know. It's actually not really a board level requirement when they're doing that. They're more satisfying their own interest, but from a political point of view, satisfy their interest, help them along the way. But generally speaking, they want to focus on those 3 phrases that I mentioned earlier. Who can remember what they are? First one? Reasonable. Reasonable. Who was that? Luke. Luke. You want to pass it to Luke? Next one? Due diligence. I hear a due diligence here. Here you go. And the last one? Duty of care. Present from me. Well observed, everybody. They want to, in your program, know that you're monitoring it. They in turn want to know that in your program, you've built out the policies that go with it and the cyber insurance, what it covers and the gotcha for it. I'm going to mention cyber security quite importantly here because A, it's really, really important to have because it helps to cover that financial side if we are found to be liable and help to recover in those scenarios where the sheer cost is astronomical. Cybersecurity policies, though, are really, really important in the sense that they cover those things, but they've become picky. They don't cover everything. We need to be careful not to sign a contract with Wolverine. He has a retractable clause. And that applies here. We need to be really, really careful with our cybersecurities. They're not a golden ticket out of safety. We need to be aware of what they cover, what they don't cover, and include that response into our programs. All in all, boards have a really big problem to take on. And to many of them today, it's feeling like an elephant is in the room. And how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. We can't solve all the cybersecurity things that we need to do here and now in one go. Boards understand that. They're gracious enough to know that. It means that they want to know that they can get to the end of eating that elephant. You've got the opportunity to support your principal, to support your execs, to help that elephant be eaten, to give them the information that they need to know around those 3 different areas, help build those programs, get those requirements understood into that community, and build that culture into the team. That's what you can do here in this room. What you can also do today is also help people understand that cybersecurity is not just us in this room. It's not just IT. It's a whole of community thing. We all take an interest. Just because the board is taking an interest doesn't mean that in our digital literacy programs, when we're teaching our kids and training our staff, that we exclude what it is to be a solid cyber citizen. To help them keep an eye out for those things, build great positive cultures. And that's where we can be proactive today. We all are aware of the risks that are in front of us. For many of us, we've seen these coming from miles away. And we sit here and go, how did we not know that that was going to be a thing? But we've been selling this message for so long. Sometimes it needs to be that needle that breaks the camel's back, the Medibanks, the Optuses. We're in a fairly fortunate position that those things have now happened because it is easier now for our boards to understand we need to take action. And we've all got a role to play in that kind of way. We've got an interesting way to support our boards doing that. So my encouragement to you, and before we go into a moment of Q&A, if you've got any questions, is that we can be proactive. Go in, support the boards, give them what they need to know, and just remember, they don't care about the technical. They don't care you've got a network, they don't care what brands you're using. The old adage that went, if you buy Cisco or IBM, she'll be right. Doesn't apply anymore. But they do want to know that you've understood the requirements well, that you've built a program and a plan and a strategy that's going to respond accordingly to meet that need, to meet the budget, to meet the outcomes of the school. And that's what the board is interested in. Okay. Would anyone like to ask any questions?
Is it the straw that broke the camel's back?
Straw? Oh, needle that broke the camel's back, the straw indeed. Probably was the straw. I'm probably thinking the the eye of the needle that the camel could try and walk through. That's the Bible verse, isn't it? Yeah, go for it.
How did you deal with educating people in cybersecurity terms? One of the things that we've noticed is that qualification has very low cybersecurity literacy rates.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of training that you would recommend that board members take or?
There is, to be completely honest, I do run a program to teach people at whatever level about cybersecurity obligations, both in a legislative point of view, but in a day-to-day coalface side of things. A lot of our boards are regular day Joes. So one of the best things that we can help them do is to understand how they can improve their own personal side of citizenship in this way. One of the approaches I take is I deal with it in an approach that talks to the personal first, then to the corporate, then to their customers, and those three different realms. The reason I speak to the personal first is because that's usually where it's going to cut to their heart. That's where it's going to get their skin in the game to take it seriously. When you talk to people and you help them understand that they can be a victim of finance fraud, or they can have all their personal information stolen and their identity stolen, and you bring those lessons to home, bring them to roost, they're more likely to then take the corporate more seriously. And then in turn, their responsibilities for protecting their customer data. Up the back.
Do you have a comment on the insurance company's cultures? Because I don't think a lot of IT guys are often renegotiating with the cyber insurance companies.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some few gotchas to look out for. There's actually heaps and heaps of them, but a couple of big ones that I've really noticed a great deal of is third-party exclusion. And that's a really important one because we can be working with vendors, managed service providers, software as a service providers, cloud providers in a whole range of different ways. And there can be different roles and responsibilities on who owns the data in those circumstances in different kinds of ways and who's responsible. So in that scenario, what is really, really helpful is to spend the time to work out those boundaries, to work out who is actually going to be responsible in those scenarios, map it. In the same way we map data, map those contracts, map those areas of responsibility, identify where information and those assets are being stored and how they're being stored and who is ultimately responsible for it. There are third parties holding on to our information that aren't always clear that they're holding on to it. It could be a middleware even. Like Wand, for example, holds a lot of our information. They do a wonderful job and they've got some great policies about being a middleware provider of that. And so that's one of the really big areas that you can get in there. One of the other areas that can be a surprising gotcha in cybersecurity coverage is cost to recover. Many will exclude it entirely, which means the entire cost and the burden to recover your systems falls upon yourself. And it can be extraordinarily expensive because you might not be able to touch your existing infrastructure. So you might be having to recover from something and you need to find out of the back of nowhere a new SAN, new compute, new networking systems, needing to, you know, for a big school that could be $500,000 tomorrow. You can't touch your existing systems that have been breached. They need to be kept offline. They need to be able to have analysis. They need to have the people doing their forensics and so on over it. So the cost to recovery when we deal with our cybersecurity can be a very easy area to omit. So they might turn around and go, we're going to cover your operational cost, but we're not going to cover your cost to recover or the infrastructure required behind it. And so they're probably some of the two big ones that I've noticed a lot recently.
If you've had experience with this, are you able to share any examples of reporting, specific reporting that falls into the line? What should we be providing to them, say, once it's been Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favourite reporting mechanisms is the traffic light system. Sorry?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was here is some tips about how to report to the board and how we can support that. One of my favourite mechanisms is the traffic light system. Has anyone come across that mechanism before? It's a really helpful way. James has. The traffic light system is a reporting mechanism that highlights key components of a program or a strategy that we've got at a not too technical level, but more of an umbrella item, and we assign a colour to it, a green, a red or a yellow. And we report with that what the coverage of that item is, and we say that we're, each month it's in a green condition, yellow condition or a red condition. Red condition means it's a significant threat right now. Yellow means an emerging threat is coming up in that item. This technique works across anything, not just IT, it works for workplace health and safety, all those things. So when we take that time to build our programs and to bring all those areas coverage, if we bring together our known knowns, because ultimately a lot of our reporting comes into known knowns, we identify those key metrics that we're doing and covering in those different areas. So you might have a line item that might be your endpoint detection and recovery and monitoring, and that could just be one item by itself, and that's a really good, fairly common one. It's a really good one, especially around some really fascinating ones I've seen lately where PDFs have been coming through on an email. The PDF had malware embedded in it, EDR kicked in straight away, isolated the threat straight away, and there was just no issue, but it reported and came through. And you can report that and go, yes, those have been doing it. We've had some issues there. However, they've been fully self-contained, you might give it a green light. However, you might turn around and go, it's been happening a lot lately. We probably need to do some work with our staff on understanding these are some common threads that are going on in our EDR side of things. We might give that a yellow at that point and highlight potentially a training response or another technical response to bring that assurance there. Because generally speaking, boards just like to glaze over things and look at greens. Because generally speaking, if they see a green, 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 this is the important thing to know. They just know when they see green that you've dealt with it. That's it. That's what governance is asking. Is it being dealt with and are they satisfied it's being dealt with well? That's their primary concern. That's why they don't get involved in the technical in the same sense. So what you're doing is you're building an instrument of assurance. You're giving them confidence that you're responding, you've got the things in your program being covered, that the principal's been building the right team, you've been giving that feedback that we've got the right resources that we need. One of those items might be resourcing for ICT and cybersecurity, and you might give it a red. We've identified some things and that's becoming a significant risk factor in our area, and we're going to give it a red and would like to bring that to the board's attention in doing so. Sorry, at the back.
You mentioned that board members are exposed.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
You mentioned that board members are exposed and at risk.
Yes, they are. Board members are exposed and at risk. Yes, they are.
So how does IT get a better seat at the table?
The reality is they're not, because the way that governance work doesn't require that they do. How they get a seat at the table is by our response through the principal, typically speaking. I'm using a wide brush in that response. You do sometimes end up with scenarios where yourselves may be presenting to a board, but in common scenarios, a board largely always executes through one person, and that's the principal or CEO or managing director, depending on the corporate structure. So I'm using a fairly generalised sense of things in that sense. They want confidence that that figurehead, that person that they've placed to run the organisation is coming back to them. They could hire some people onto a board that has some really good cybersecurity insight, and they'll turn around and say, how are we going in these areas? And if the principal doesn't have the answer, that's a problem. And that's where they're going to start asking those kinds of questions in that kind of way. So there is a formal way that boards will work through a principal to do that. So, but in general terms, we generally don't have that seat. But what we do want to do is inspire and support the principal to reflect back. And that's our proactive thing that we can do, instead of being what I often call transactional, just waiting to hear. We don't have to wait and hear anymore. We can be proactive. We can provide that board report for the principal. And he can just copy and paste it straight into his monthly report. And a principal, I'm sure, would appreciate that. Ralph.
One of the things that a lot of us are finding in our schools is we don't report to the principal, we report to the chief officer or whatever. And that's another layer, isn't it, between that board seat and what's going on in your school. Any reflection on that?
If you be patient with me for a moment, I do have a solid opinion on this. And my opinion is that the head of IT and the head of security should be reporting directly to the principal, not through a business manager. That's also an opinion based upon a significant amount of experience on getting skin into the game to the right people. In general terms, when IT is reporting to a CFO or a business person, the financial side can become a priority out of alignment with the ICT program and the security program. And that doesn't necessarily help reach the outcomes that the board's looking for, or can sometimes create greyness or a wishy-washiness, if you will, in that place. At the end of the day, we can't do anything that's not digital. Digital impacts anything and everything that we do. Take something away from that intrinsic element that helps our operation, helps our staff, helps us deliver the most excellence in education, is grounded in digital. That can't necessarily be relayed through finance. However, some finance people are great. Some finance people are so tuned in to understanding what this dynamic is all about that they're more like a team leader than just responsible for finance, and they do a very good job of representing with the principal and at the board level. So it can be a bit funny, but in general terms though, my thought to people is you really want your IT programs, digital programs and cybersecurity reporting directly to the principal or CEO. Any other questions? Thanks everybody, appreciate your time. Thanks, Brenton.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, David, for your sessions earlier on. We're at morning tea break. It's 45 minutes. We expect you back here at 11:15. Whilst you're down there, the morning tea's been put out down where the coffee was this morning. Whilst you're down there, if you wouldn't mind dropping in and seeing our sponsors, because without our sponsors doing these events, we wouldn't be able to put them on as we do. See you all at 11:15. Thank you.
Tactics to hopefully get us on track. Welcome back. Hopefully everyone's feeling full after a nice morning tea. You would have seen that the heater's turned on both in here and in that little undercover area. So thank you to David and the maintenance team for getting that sorted, because I can now feel my fingertips, which is good. Look, next up we have Marcus Claxton, who's going to talk to us about vulnerability management. We'll then have a small intersession break, about 15 minutes. Look, that will be the last opportunity you will have to get a hot drink from the coffee guy, because he is then out of here. After that, we'll be back then in here to hear from Chris Gersh on incident response planning before having a break for lunch back down in the quad. Everyone's okay with that? Great. Everyone's nodding heads, so I know you're all awake. You're caffeinated. Fantastic. I'll hand over.
Great. Thanks, Tim. All right. There we go. All right. Okay, slides missing. That's a good start. Okay, look, first of all, I'd just like to send a big congratulations to the Mitie committee. It takes a lot of effort to pull off a day like today, and it's just so great to be back in the room and to be back in the room more frequently. So well done, guys, fantastic. So, all right. The slides that are missing weren't really that important because they're just a little bit about me. So I currently have the biggest job title that I've ever had in my career. I am the Manager of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Advisory Services at AIS New South Wales. Look, I've been in 2 schools, for those of you who don't know me. The rest of my job experience has been in corporate roles in infrastructure and enterprise architecture and so on. I've also got some certifications in Microsoft security technologies, and the last one was I'm also a painter of Warhammer miniatures, and I had a couple of really cool photos of some of my recent work. And look, you might think, why is he bringing that up? But even this morning I had a conversation around business relationship management. And anytime I get a chance to speak in these forums, I really want to make sure that we do focus on the fact that we support people in the use of technology. We don't just support technology. So it's really important to, when we talk to other people, not just see them as someone who has experience and certifications, qualifications, but also that they are a human. And so that was my little thing about with the miniatures. So anyway, any other Warhammer painters? Oh, I see a hand. Sorry? Oh, that's the one. Yeah, good. Someone gets it. All right. So vulnerability management. Cyber threat actors, they need to be right once, whereas us cyber defenders, we need to be right every single time. That's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? Because all it takes is just one opportunity for a cyber threat actor to get into our systems and all hell breaks loose, and we're in a lot of trouble and a world of hurt. There are so many, the classic one, the Newcastle Grammar experience. I think every time we hear about that, we just shake in our boots and pray that that is never going to be us. But that was just a single thing. The hackers were right once, and unfortunately the defenders weren't every time in that. Now, I'm managing two things here. So sometimes cyber defence can feel like we're painting the Harbour Bridge, can't it? And this quote was sent to me in a link. There's a link there on LinkedIn for humanising patch prioritisation, reasonable security. I think it's very well worth you read. And this whole concept of reasonableness, we touched on that in the earlier session, but cyber defenders might feel like they are serving a life sentence in a seemingly futile act of eternal patching. Anyone feel like that ever? Yep. And yet still get blamed when the inevitable happens and the asset that wasn't patched becomes the problem. Now, if you get a chance, there's a gentleman named Denny Wan. Denny? So Denny is an expert in cybersecurity, Open Fair, the Fair Institute as well, and he also runs a thing called the Reasonable Security Podcast. When it comes to thinking about cybersecurity and a risk-based approach, which is really where we need to get to, and reasonable risk as well, or a reasonableness approach, he's the man, and I'd recommend going and having a chat with him at some point. So before we get into vulnerability analysis, or vulnerability management, let's just have a look at what ITIL says, and I'm a big fanboy of ITIL. Anyone who knows me will understand that. So according to ITIL 4, and this is straight from the Information Security Practice Guide, a threat is any potential event that could have a negative impact on an asset. And a threat actor is any person or organisation that poses a threat. And a vulnerability? Again, straight from the Information Security Practice Guide from ITIL 4, a vulnerability is any weakness in an asset or control that could be exploited by a threat. And putting these all together, these terms are related in the following way. Threat actors exploit vulnerabilities to have an impact on assets. So threat actors, they exploit these vulnerabilities. And more often than not, they're looking for targets with easy access. I saw a thing on the news the other night, and it was, you've probably seen this many times on the news, where there's a lot of issues around in Victoria and Queensland around youth crime. And there was this one particular video footage of these youths just going from house to house and trying door handles. And generally speaking, that is how most cyber attacks start. It's that same kind of concept. They're going and they're just looking for open doors. They're looking for doors that are unlocked. They're not necessarily targeting a specific objective. Now that's something I think is very, very important for us to understand, especially when it comes from schools. So where do the threat actors, or what are they looking for? They're looking for ways to extort. They're looking for, or we could have insider threats. These are the other sorts of things that we often experience in schools, or abuse of service. Has anyone ever come or found a Microsoft 365 account from a teacher or a student get locked out because it's been sending lots and lots of spam? No one experienced that? No? No one willing to admit? Yeah, there's a few hands. So we had a couple of incidents like that at Hills Grammar, and there were two teachers in particular who their account kept getting locked out because that sort of thing was happening. And I asked them, I said, do you use that email address and password combination anywhere else on the internet? You can guess the response. Yeah, that's the combination I use everywhere. Same username, password. I said, well, that's why they've been able to do that. But we do need to consider the sorts of assets that we are protecting in schools when we're thinking about vulnerability management. So obviously we are protecting academic integrity of our schools, ensuring that the academic data is secure and the assessments are kept integrous. We're protecting student information, and we'll extend that to parents and families and so on as well. Contact details, medical records. Staff information, we're obviously holding a lot of critical information and personally identifiable information on staff. We're protecting the operational viability of our schools. There are enormous costs associated with cyber incidents, as we heard earlier today. Potential fraud, access to school intellectual property potential. And when I say that, it's more the teachers being able to access that IP to continue normal operation, not necessarily that someone outside is trying to steal that IP. And the school reputation, of course. Now I'll ask you, thinking about all of those things that we're protecting, where does a threat actor find value in any of that? Why are they attacking it? Why are they trying to, yep.
Well, personal information can be sold to other people. It can be used for extortion.
Yep.
You can get into a system like the ransom and demand payment.
Okay, so they're the two big ones. It's the extortion because they're threatening to release personally identifiable information, and it's the ransomware that they've stopped your normal business operation because they've encrypted everything and they're trying to extort money. Now, in real terms, a threat actor can only really hope to get maybe $1 million from a school. Maybe, if that. And when you think about an organisation like Lockbit, anyone familiar with Lockbit? They're a Russian hacker group. Now, $1 million to them, sure, it's good money, but that's chicken feed. Okay, so when you're thinking about these threat actors and what they are trying to achieve, more often than not, it is financial gain. But we've got to understand that, in general, schools are more an opportunistic target than a specific targeted attack. And generally, as I said, schools or the attacks start with this kind of concept. Anyone familiar with Nmap? So Nmap's a tool that you can go, and anyone involved in any kind of cybersecurity will understand that Nmap, you can find open ports. And again, it's akin to those kids going from car to car looking for those open door handles. So are schools targeted? Probably not. Sometimes, sure, if somebody has a vendetta, but generally, from the large-scale cyber attacks, it's more opportunistic. So what our goal is to ensure that there are as few vulnerabilities as possible so that those opportunistic attackers move on to the next car in the next driveway and don't worry about ours altogether. And so where are our vulnerabilities? It's an interesting concept when you start to think about vulnerabilities for a school. And David, when you put up your application map up there, I went, wow, look, there's a whole lot of opportunity there for different vulnerabilities. There's so many different applications. And most of our schools are exactly like that. Our application stack is enormous, and it's really complex as well. Put on top of that, the infrastructure that we have, and so I've listed there your infrastructure. You've got your network hardware, you've got your firewall, then you've got your network itself with the ACLs, you've got your server hardware, Now, if you're in a 3-tier storage, you've got not only your server equipment, but the storage, and then you've got your firmware, and then you've got your operating systems that sit on top of that, and then you've got the potential misconfigurations on all of this as well. Can you see where I'm going? There's a whole lot of opportunity here for vulnerabilities, and that's just in the infrastructure. Then you start to tack on IoT. And you've now got IoT in your infrastructure, and you've got all these little fancy different devices that are connected to your network, and each one of those could potentially have a vulnerability as well. And again, not just in the operating system, but in the firmware and so on, and the list continues. Our applications, I mentioned that, and our application stacks, but it doesn't just go to the apps that we have on premise, it's also our third-party vendors. How are we assessing their vulnerabilities? Then there's the endpoints. And we could have school provided, which will reduce the vulnerabilities potentially. Then you throw BYOD in the mix. Hands up if your school is BYOD in any way, shape or form. Yep. So that in itself, you've got untrusted devices connecting to a network and brings with it all sorts of additional vulnerabilities. Then we've got our access, and we have to make sure that we include access in our vulnerability analysis. If we are still using simple passwords or short passwords instead of passphrases, there's a vulnerability right there. If we're using MFA using SMS or email, another vulnerability. If we're using the Authenticator app, obviously we're reducing that. Service accounts, are we using, and then process and practice as well. Are we using, I'm not going to ask for hands, this would be too embarrassing, but if you are using your day-to-day account and it has global admin or global access to your M365, I'm sure there's someone out there who is still using that. And then, as we looked at earlier or heard, 82% of successful attacks have some kind of human factor involved. And yet, I don't know about you, but when we mostly think about vulnerability management, we immediately start to go into patch management and things like that. But if 82% of the successful attacks are human related in their nature, we're actually putting a whole lot of effort into something that's only really going to look after 18% of successful attacks. Think about that. So how do we think about humans and the human side of the vulnerabilities in our schools? I mean, we had a successful, well, when I say successful, we had a cyber incident at AIS New South Wales last year. We went through it in detail in our cybersecurity symposium earlier this year, and it was a human factor that caused that incident. We cannot get past it. It was a human vulnerability, and it was because of a socially engineered kind of concept. Yes, there we go. The book Stolen Focus, it's not about IT, it's not about security or anything like that, but in it there was this quote, and it's, for example, Sean Parker, who was one of the earliest investors in Facebook. He told a public audience that the creators of the site had asked themselves from the start, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? And he said the techniques they used were exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. And this is one of the biggest vulnerabilities that hackers will actually use in order to get into our networks and our systems. Human psychology. All right, how do we know where the vulnerabilities are? Well, penetration testing. If your school is not doing regular penetration testing, you absolutely need to. Take it to your boards, take it to your school executive. We recommend at AIS, penetration testing should be done annually. And obviously, you really need to take the results of that penetration test and act on it, but it should be done regularly. And especially if your systems are changing, because it's one of these things around cybersecurity. You can't just set once and then forget. It has to be a continual process. We also get told about vulnerabilities through threat intelligence. Vendor advisories, ACSC, if you're not a member of the ACSC partner program, I strongly recommend that you join up, and they provide some non-vendor based threat analysis and threat advisories. And there are various databases like VirusTotal and Have I Been Pawned. They have ways of providing detail on vulnerabilities as well. There's toolset scanning. So David mentioned Qualys. There's also Nessus. Tripwire is another one. And there's the Microsoft Security Score and Defender Dashboard. Now, one of the problems with all of those tools is that they can often give you a huge list of vulnerabilities, especially the very first time that you run them. And so having that enormous list can make things a little bit challenging. There's also the regular schedules. Obviously, the Microsoft Patch Tuesday is something that we are anyone using Microsoft technologies, you would understand about that. There could be vulnerabilities in the way we use MFA and how it's done. Conditional access policies when we're looking through and figuring out exactly how people can access our systems. There is also self-assessment can enable us to find vulnerabilities in our systems and services and networks as well. There was a question earlier about Essential 8 or NIST, ISO 27001, which one is more appropriate for schools. When I started at AIS last year, almost to a year in 2 weeks' time, pretty cool. I'm enjoying the ride so far. When I started there, we were looking at Essential 8 and thought that one really was what we would select and implement ourselves. But the more and more we looked at it, the more we thought, well, it gives you a whole lot of controls and things that you can tick a box to say, yes, we have that in place. But where NIST goes one step further is it starts looking at process as well. And process can be a big place where vulnerabilities exist. And so I think the more we look at it and the more we are starting to think NIST is probably the more appropriate one for us and schools in general. It was also mentioned that ISO 27001, it's enormous. Perhaps for big schools, but you really do need to make your own decision in all of that. But how do we find out where the vulnerabilities are in our humans, our people? Well, phishing campaigns are a great place. The more regularly you do them and the more you shake them up, the more you will find the regular offenders. And regular cyber awareness training as well. And developing a cyber culture within your school. That is one of the most significant aspects of making sure that you've not only are able to identify the vulnerabilities in your humans, but also that you're able to sort them out as well. So, we know what we're protecting, and we know where the vulnerabilities are now. Now what? Let me ask you this. If you received a critical vulnerability from a vendor, critical vulnerability, they're basically saying this is critical, and they've highlighted it because it's easy to exploit and it's well known and it's out there. How quickly should this be remediated? Anyone want to jump in? Critical vulnerability. Awesome. I should have known, Richard, you would give me the correct answer. Yes, it's related to risk, and that is one of the most important things. Which is my very next slide. So risk. All the vulnerabilities that we have identified, every single one of them carries with it an associated risk. And we now, at this point, we have a potential huge list of vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. And but the vulnerabilities, they're not the issue, okay? And hear me out, they're not the issue. It's the associated risk that needs to be dealt with that issue. So for example, and I'll use a non-technical analogy, you've got this amazing safe, and it is the world's greatest safe, and it's a really, really flashy safe. It does everything you need it to, and so because it's so awesome, you've decided that you're going to bolt it to the middle of your lounge room floor. So when people come in, they can remark how amazing this safe is. And you've got all of your cash stored in there and your jewelry and all of your personal documentation. Now, your next door neighbour, they're not quite so flamboyant as you, and they've decided that they like this safe. They've bought exactly the same safe, but they've got it in a room, a locked room with a keypad, in a basement that's also behind a locked door. And because you want everybody to see your safe, you don't worry about keeping the curtains closed when you go out. You want people to walk past and go, hey, that's a pretty good safe. Now then, both of these people get an email from the vendor saying there is a critical vulnerability in that safe, which basically renders the whole lock mechanism completely useless to somebody who knows how to get in. Now, that's a critical vulnerability. Which person needs to act on that vulnerability quicker? The person who's got it bolted to their lounge room floor, of course. And that's the same with us. If we have a whole lot of controls, so we regularly close the curtains, we've got locked doors, we've got access control in front of the device or the system that has that critical vulnerability, then it becomes less likely that it will be exploited or exploitable. And so it means that we can treat that or take our time treating that. Now, if fixing that safe meant having to dismantle the whole mechanism, and it was going to take you, let's say, 8 hours to remediate that vulnerability, if you need to do that right away, then you've got to find that time. And in a school system, that could be resources that you don't have, it could be money that you don't have, it could be impacting normal operation, which is something we always want to avoid. However, if we have all of those other controls in place in front of that system that needs to be remediated, then we can take our time. So vulnerability management is very much about risk management and less about actual patching and remediation of risk, or of the vulnerabilities themselves. We use, at AIS, we have a monthly risk register meeting where we go through our risk register and we look at all of every single risk that we've highlighted in our infrastructure and our processes and the whole works. And this is the document that we use. This is the first half. We identify the risk, give it a description, and if this is a vulnerability, then we would put that down, the potential impact, whether it is ongoing or one time. We then give it a rating. How much, or what is the impact of this risk? Should it be exploited? And what is the probability? And that gives us a priority level. Once we've done that, we then go through and we say, well, okay, what actions are we going to take? What controls or mitigation are we going to actually implement when it comes to this particular risk? And you'll see there that we've got a detailed description of the controls, and then we reassess the impact level and the probability based on those controls that we've put in place. And of course, every risk must have an owner and a review date when it would next be reviewed. And some of the risks that we identify, because they're low priority, or they're not going to be ones that we need to address very regularly, we actually put down a date that we'll only address this every 3 months. And so we won't even consider it in each risk meeting, in each monthly risk meeting. And of course, we have our next steps. What are we next going to be doing as far as this risk goes? And a status, open, controlled, or closed. And that's simply the matrix that we use when we're talking about probability and impact as far as our vulnerabilities go or our risks. And when we're thinking about risk and risk treatment, there are 4, and again, this is reasonably taken from the ITIL framework. There's risk avoidance, so we remove the risky thing out of the environment altogether, or we don't permit that risky activity being performed. The modification, risk modification, where we place a control, implement a control to reduce the likelihood and or the impact. So some controls will make a risk less impactful or less likely, or both. And risk sharing, sometimes, and when we move things into the cloud, this is often what we're doing. We're sharing the risk with an external vendor. We've got to be careful about that, and that's where a product, or not a product, a service like ST4S comes in place, because we're allowing or relying on the ST4S analysis of particular third-party applications to say whether or not those are secure. And by doing that, we're moving some of the risk into the vendor's area instead of our own. But there might be times as well where we will retain risk where it's deemed to be below an acceptable threshold. Now, there are other times where we might even retain a critical risk in our systems, even though it is above a threshold. And the reason we might do that is for a legacy system. For instance, we might still be using a legacy system in operation. However, patching it just is not possible and Linux systems can lend themselves to this, perhaps WordPress systems, things like that have plugins that may be out of date, still in use, but can't be patched anymore because it might break the whole system. What we need to do then is focus on making sure that we have other controls in place to reduce the risk. So controlling and mitigating our vulnerabilities, regular patching, obviously, develop a patch management strategy, whether or not you're going to do that manually or automatic. And remember, it should include everything, not just your servers and your operating systems, but it should include your switches, IoT devices, whatever you've got in the environment, you would need to make sure that it is somewhere outlined in your patch management strategy. There are automatic patch management offerings as well, Azure Arc. We've just started to use that, or desired state configuration tools like Chef and Puppet as well. Some vulnerabilities can be mitigated by hardening, and what that means is using configuration controls to make sure that some settings are turned off or on based on whether or not that would increase or decrease a vulnerability. And ST4S is one that can be used for that, but often vendors will provide details on how to harden their products as well. Access control, the web application firewall for web-facing systems, and this is often for legacy systems as well. A web application firewall can be useful if the system does have some vulnerabilities. The web application firewall can protect even an internet-exposed system from those vulnerabilities. Process modification is another way we can mitigate and control vulnerabilities, and training for your end users. Remember, the human aspect is one that you really need to put a lot of focus into. Okay. Just a couple of quick words on patching without a sandbox. Having worked in large corporates, often systems will have a development system, a test system, and then a production system. And obviously, even the Microsoft patching, you can implement that in the dev first, then test, and then prod. Now, very few schools, if any, would have the ability to have that kind of environment. You might have some, maybe a dev and a production, but certainly not that kind of rigor. So really, we need to consider our backup plan before we do any kind of patching. Always backup or snapshot, where possible, prior to patching, and that includes switch configs. There have been numerous times where I've heard of people where they've done a firmware update on a network switch and forgotten to just back up the switch config. And switches are so easy. I mean, literally backing up the switch config takes 2 seconds. Now, patching is not a standard change. Does everyone know what I mean by standard change? Standard change is one that you don't really need to go through the normal change process with. It's not, but it can be. Because the tools like Azure Arc and the new automated tools for patching can mean that we don't have to go through that change process. But I would recommend actually thinking through, even if you're a one-person band in your IT, going through proper change management to think through, how is this going to impact? What sort of outage is going to be required? What sort of backup plan will be needed? All of those things before doing any kind of patching. And if you are a one-person band in your school, consider using this peer network and people that you know to maybe just run their eyes over your change plans. Your frequency, like what Richard said, frequency should align with your risk appetite as far as your patching goes. You might say, well, patching, we can get away with once, like we just do our patching in school holidays. If your risk appetite and if your risk register reflects that, that's certainly very valid. Or you may say, no, we've got to do it every single month and make sure that we are up to date. Just remember, it's your other controls and your other mitigation things that are in place where, or that governs all of that. And whenever you do an outage window, I probably shouldn't have to say this, but I feel like I just want to put it in there. Whenever you need an outage or a hazard window, make sure you get approval from the school. Make sure you go and take it to your executive and make sure that they're all aware. Because the last thing you want is people just complaining that things are offline and then you realise that, well, it's because of your patching. And very lastly, are you equipped to patch right now? Now, if you do have a critical advisory and it is a high-risk device or system, it's internet facing, it's something that is very accessible, and you need to patch it right now, do you have a process and a plan in place? And I would suggest just simple 5 steps. Making sure that you've identified the vulnerability, you've assessed it in your risk management assessment, you develop very rapidly a remediation plan of how you're going to patch that critical vulnerability, gain acceptance from the business of that implementation plan, because sometimes it might be critical enough that you have to do it in the middle of the day or something like that. And implement and communicate the outcome. Make sure everybody is aware of how it went and that everything is okay now. And that's all. So I will open for questions, and then if we have time, I might just touch on the services that AIS New South Wales provide in cyber. Any questions? Yep.
How do you manage testing across your cloud systems and those systems don't even have a test system or that capability?
So how do you manage testing across cloud systems? So are they cloud systems that are purely SaaS, so vendor maintained, or your own?
A mix of both. You know, we're our own systems here, but we don't have a proper test system, but we also have vendor systems as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Again, I think it's very hard to do that, almost impossible. It's just then really about having a very good backup plan, making sure that you know exactly that if things go wrong when you do patch or when you do update, that you can get back to that previous state really quickly. Okay, so it's less around the testing. If you don't have a test environment, then it's less about the testing and more about just making sure that you can back out well. Yep. Did I miss anything, Chris?
Sounds good. One question I do have though is, you mentioned the essential aid.
Yep.
How realistic do you find the mitigation strategies for patching applications and operating systems, especially at the high maturity levels for schools, like 48 hours being sent placing and within a week or 2 weeks?
From Essential 8 perspective? Yeah, no, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's why I think, because that doesn't enable us to use our risk strategy, okay? Because we might have a risk tolerance that says that we can have a longer time frame between when the patch is released and to when it actually gets patched. And as I said, if our risk tolerance within the school says that we only do the Microsoft patching every school holidays, then we can't attain Essential 8. It's just impossible. Whereas NIST allows us a little bit more to do that because we've actually used that risk analysis. Was that, yep? Cool. Anyone else? Awesome, okay. So, very, very quickly, what we do, AIS New South Wales, we are developing more and more over time cybersecurity services. That's the whole reason for my role, really. Late last year, we enabled a whole range of schools to achieve some ethical hack ethical hacking in their schools. And the interesting thing that we found is that when schools applied for those cyber grants, 80% of the schools that applied had never had an ethical hack performed on their systems. Never. Okay? And I think that's fairly indicative of schools, independent schools, Australia-wide, I would say. We also provide a service where we will go in and do a high-level infrastructure review. It's part of our whole school review, IT review service. I'll get to the critical friend last. We're starting to develop guidance around best practice, and as I say, around whether Essential 8 or NIST is the best way. But also, we have just started a process around data governance and looking at labelling and using all of the Microsoft utilities, Purview, and so on. And we hope to be able to, as we go through that process, provide a bit of guidance to schools around that as well. We are developing or about to release a series of cybersecurity webinars and potentially some on-site staff awareness training. And we do provide the facility of a critical friend in incidents as well. Only about 5 or 6 weeks ago, we had a school contact us, and they were right in the middle of an attack by Lockbit. Thankfully, they avoided having their systems encrypted. They did have data exfiltrated and a ransom note. But we were able to be just a friendly voice on the end of the phone. We don't get involved in the remediation or the correction and so on, but we can certainly help validate the decisions the schools are making. And so we are there as that friend. And even the IT manager in that school was very appreciative, because Graham and we were able to just touch base with that staff member as time went on over the following 2 or 3 weeks, and just ask the question, how are you going? You know, not just around the technical side, but how are you as a human? And they really, really appreciated that. So keep an eye out, because we are developing more and more services over time, and we are sure to send that information out to you. Anyway, that's all I have, and I believe I have finished bang on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I come from Victoria, and we don't have those sort of services down there from our ISV. We're streaming this, aren't we? Maybe that'll get something to happen. You're very, very lucky up here. We did have planned an intercession, but instead of doing that, let's get to lunch a bit earlier. So we'll go to the next presentation, who is Chris Gersh from Net Strategy, and Chris is presenting on incident response planning.
Wait for them to plug it in. Pardon? All right. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and speak on this topic that I think everybody's been talking about. For those that don't know me, my name's Chris. My title is not quite as long as Marcus's. So I head up cybersecurity for Net Strategy. We're a technology service provider focusing pretty much on education. And what I want to do today is talk about how you would plan for and manage a cybersecurity incident. Dave spoke about an incident that happened last year. What I want to do is talk about this from an actual real life scenario. So we're going to go through two scenarios, and I'll go into Dave's scenario in a bit more detail, and Dave's going to keep me on point here. So why do we do this? Right. I think it's been mentioned a few times, and I'm glad that my figures align with Mike's, that we talk about the impact of cybersecurity incidences. It's incurring all the time. It's only increasing. If you look at the ACSC figures, education is the third most targeted industry here in Australia, behind government, federal and state government, and tech services like NetStrategy. We live in a very busy part of the world, so the Asia Pacific region is the most targeted region across the globe for last year. Cybercrime in and of itself is a booming business. It's got a whole supply chain in and of itself, and we'll again talk a little bit more about that when we look at how we manage these instances. Cyber insurance premiums are going up. The cost of a cyber incident typically for schools is around that 100,000. When you take into account additional costs for ongoing support of impacted victims, we can very quickly get into the 7-figure mark. And the ransoms that these guys are asking for sort of vary between hundreds of thousands to millions. So I guess at the end of the day, what's really important for this group and for all schools is that at some point in your careers, you are most likely going to face a major cybersecurity incident. A number of reasons. Schools are highly complex environments. There's a high technology debt. You've got dozens of applications. There's a lack of guidance from government, even from the board, on how we are supposed to manage cybersecurity. If I was talking to a whole series of banks, this is going to be a very simple conversation, right? Because you're very well regulated. Schools, even if you take into account the new strategy that the Australian government's pushing out, you're kind of in this sort of no man's land of regulation. So it's becoming on us to sort of drive the path, and that's where conversations around NIST and Essential 8 and ISO and so forth help. Cybersecurity risk and risk management, we've spoken about a little bit before in the previous sessions. Vital. There's this sort of blurred understanding of what risks are. I think schools generally, at this point in time, have don't quite have a mature understanding of their cybersecurity risks as such, and especially how that gets reported up to the boards. And then just look at the users that are on your network. Right? I don't know of any other organisation that has babies through to adults consuming data on the networks. Again, if we're talking about corporates, it's a very simple conversation. We're all dealing with adults. So all these factors come into play when we talk about the likelihood of a cybersecurity incident occurring. Now, one of the comments that was made in terms of, well, who's likely targeting schools? Right? Is it opportunistic drive-bys, and therefore you just need to be faster than the guy next to you, right? To use the old bear analogy. Understanding your risk profile becomes really important, and we'll talk about that when you're preparing for a cybersecurity incident. So, at the end of the day, the only thing really in your control is how you manage a cybersecurity incident. Right? As Marcus mentioned, the bad guys only need to be right once, right, and then they're in. So that's not a lot of control that you have. But how you manage and how you respond to a cybersecurity incident, you've got a whole lot of control over that. If you plan for it, right? And this is a key. You don't want to be planning and practicing your cybersecurity incident response when there's an actual real-world response incident occurring. right? That is not the time to practice for these things. It's not the time to get our templates and comms and who's who in the zoo type questions answered. So, depending on who you're talking to, there are distinct components to managing a cybersecurity incident and planning for one. You have the preparation, right? This is the before an event occurs, okay? And there's a lot to sort of unpack in that, and we'll get to that in the next slide. Then the juicy stuff, right? This is where we start earning our money and seeing how we react under pressure. Detecting an alert, and then once you've detected an alert, how do we analyse that? How do we get more information out of that? Once we've got that information, how are we containing that? How are we eradicating that alert? And then how are we recovering? And then once we sort of back to BAU, how are we doing a debrief on that incident? What's the process there? So these could be cyclic as well. So you'll go from detection analysis to containment, back to detection analysis, and so on and so forth, just depending on the incident. So when we talk about preparation, there's 3 key steps that you probably want to do first. First is your cybersecurity incident response plan. Now, one of the things that we see probably a bit too often is that, okay, well, we've got a critical incident response plan that mentions data breaches in it. Now, what we suggest, and what the industry suggests, is that that's probably not good enough. You need a dedicated cybersecurity incident response plan, because the way that you respond to something like a malware outbreak or a ransomware outbreak is completely different to how you would respond to a fire or a school lockdown. So great, excellent. You build your plan. It's a good glossy 20, 30 page long document that gets put up in the shelf. Fantastic. The plan in and of itself, while it's useful in some areas in terms of establishing who's on the incident response team, what are our comms and what are our escalation processes? Like who do we call and when do we call them? Are we calling AIS New South Wales? Are we calling our cyber insurers? Are we calling our MSP, ACSC, right? When do we call them, and are there contact details in this document, right? Or are we going to have to frantically try to find phone numbers? What are the comms templates that we are sending out? So Dave earlier mentioned, there were comms sent out to teachers, to the staff, and they were developed in conjunction with the lawyers. Having those templates ready to go is vital, right? Because it just streamlines the whole process. So you've got all that squared away, fantastic. Right, what actually are you supposed to be doing when an incident occurs? And this is where your playbooks come in. So where am I going to get more detail on this incident, right? So the way in which you respond to, say, a ransomware would be different in terms of the steps that you take compared to, say, a phishing event. So planning through this is vital because it gives you effectively a checklist that you need to go through, and you want to develop this before you actually see an incident. You don't want to be coming up with these checklists on the fly. And then the tabletop exercises. Okay, you got your plan, you got your playbooks. They're all great, excellent. They're useless if you don't actually know what they do. You don't know how they work. So making sure that you practice your incident response, having all areas of the school, from including the board, leadership, your technical teams, your schools, and your external parties, all coming together and practice these scenarios, just so you're familiar with how you're communicating, who you're communicating with, and what are we doing. They're the 3 main areas of, when I talk about cybersecurity incident response planning, these are the 3 key components of an effective cybersecurity plan. the actual plan itself, the playbooks, and the tabletop exercises. But there's more preparation involved in making sure that you've got as much control over an incident as possible. So we talk about defence in depth. This is a very broad, I could probably devote a dozen slides to defence in depth in and of itself. This is where you have all your controls in place, your vulnerability management controls, to understand what am I exposed to. Your security detection controls, is my AV up to scratch? You might have a managed SOC service. Is that working as intended? Your network's segmentation, your device hardening, right? So these are all controls that you can layer on top of each other to provide that defence in depth. Because some won't work. You might get a 0-day that comes past, and it just completely bypasses all your controls except maybe that one control that you've implemented. The other thing is know what's normal. Know what's normal and know what's abnormal in your network. Right? So these baselines of your network is critical to understand the impact and the scope of an incident. And then your recovery tools. Are my backups good? Have I tested my backups? Again, coming back to the Essential 8. I think places really good emphasis on backups and testing of backups. And then, do I have clean OS images to pull from? Do I have a clean application images to pull from? So these are all the activities that you kind of want to take into account before an incident occurs in ideal world. But then you've implemented everything, you think you've got everything under control, and then somebody's clicked on something that they shouldn't have, and then all of a sudden you're starting to get a whole lot of emails and calls being thrown at you. This is where you go into detection and analysis stage, right? So when we detect something, there's two main detecting events in the industry. It's what's called the precursor and an indicator. So precursor is a sign of what may occur. So in the example before, when Nmap was thrown up, if you see Nmap scans on your network, on your firewall, on your web service, that's a precursor, right? That's somebody scanning your network. A vulnerability exploit being made available is another precursor. Any vulnerability announcement of a major, very popular service could be considered a precursor. So, for example, hands up those who are aware that there is a vulnerability that's just come out for OpenSSH. A couple at the back there. So this is a precursor because OpenSSH, is a common thing that could be exposed through your firewall, and this is a remote code execution that could allow full administrative root access to your systems, unauthenticated. So understanding that, and then coming back to Mike's comment, a presentation earlier, understanding your footprint, what you're exposing, is vital in these cases, because you can then take a proactive step to say, okay, well, we're going to shut things down a bit. We're going to batten the hatches. This is where precursors can help. And this is where good cybersecurity threat intelligence is really vital, because it helps enrich these precursors. If you start seeing a whole lot of scans on your network based on a vulnerability that's just been exploited, that's something that you can be aware of. And then we have indicators, right? This is something that's already happening or has happened. So successful authentication logins on your 365 environment or over your VPN from an unknown location or a weird location. Antivirus alerts popping up. These are all indicators. And so once you've got these precursors, once you've got these indicators, we then go into analysis stage, right, where we need to understand the impact, the severity, right? Is this affecting one host? Is it affecting all my 1,000 devices? And at this analysis stage, what we're trying to do is compile a list of indicators of compromise, right? So that we can then go into our next stage, which is our eradication and containment stage. So we're going to look at two scenarios here. These are two real-world scenarios that we've worked on and managed. And we're going to look at how we got the initial detection, and then how, using that detection, we then went into our analysis stage, and then what were our containment and eradication and recovery processes there. So one deals with malware, and the other one deals with ransomware, but as we kind of alluded, there's a little caveat to that because it kind of wasn't ransomware. So, the first incident, what was our initial detection? So our initial detection was an email to our SecOps team saying that there was a critical incident detected and that machine's been isolated. Now, I just sat down for lunch in the lunchroom in the Nest Strategy office in North Sydney. And I saw this email come through and I've just, right, here we go. One of the best bit of advice that I can give you, if you're facing with this, is just take a moment to collect your breath. Don't go panic station straight away. Just take a few deep breaths. Right, what do we need to do? So this alert came through and it said that the WScript exe, which is a legitimate executable in Windows, had run this weird JavaScript. Rightio. That's all we knew at this stage. We knew the host, we knew the process, and we knew that the host was isolated from the network at this stage. So there's actually a good bit of information in here. So what do we do here? Now we go into our analysis stage. Forgive me, this is a bit of a busy slide, but we'll go through it. We got our detection, we've got some initial information. Now, what do we need to do from here? We need to understand the scope, we need to understand the severity, right? Is this affecting everybody else in the network, or is it just isolated to this machine? So the first thing we need to do is say, okay, let's work on the file, right? Let's see what's happening there. Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can go about this. You can get a file hash and then look to see if that file hash exists elsewhere in the environment. Now, depending on your tooling, this is not a product push by any stretch of the imagination, but depending on your tooling would mean that the way in which you obtain a list of a file hash on, if it exists on any other endpoint, would depend. And that's where your playbooks come into become useful. Your playbooks will show how you go about running these reports. So in the top left-hand corner there, you'll see that sort of JSON file. So this was from our EDR solution. And what it shows is that there was a WMI query to discover system information, right? So the malware, or this process, this JavaScript, was running some device enumeration, and then it was connecting out, it was establishing a post connection out to this weird and wacky domain. Now, when we threw that domain into VirusTotal, it came up with 8 out of 93 vendors have flagged this. But what was interesting was the comment underneath that this was seen as part of the sock ghoulish malware family. Has anyone ever heard of sock ghoulish or had any experience with sock ghoulish in any way, shape or form? No? Okay. So this is where threat intelligence helps, because we're able to investigate that sock ghoulish is
a malware stream that's often injected into compromised WordPress sites, and if somebody's browsing a compromised site, it's a drive-by download that displays as a update your browser now. Now, coming back to a point that's been mentioned a few times, that human element, the particular employee that this device was impacted, they were new to the organisation. They didn't know the way in which browsers were updated. They didn't know that process yet. So when they saw this very legitimate looking prompt appear to say, oh, click here to update your browser, of course they're going to do that, because why would you not want to update your browser? And then shenanigans ensue. So that was our working hypothesis at this stage. Now there's a way in which you can verify where a file is downloaded from, and that's in the bottom left-hand corner there, where you can look at data streams on a particular file. And what it will show you, if you can see a zone identifier, is where that file was actually downloaded from. So in this case, it was downloaded from some sales website, but the host URL there, which I'm hoping you can kind of see, will show that it's pulled from what was ultimately a compromised WordPress plugin. So when we then plugged that hash of the file into VirusTotal, it showed that, yep, 6 out of 60 vendors have flagged this as malicious. Now, sometimes it will be 0 out of 60, sometimes it will be 60 out of 60, right? And then you've got this sort of grey in middle in between, right? So 6 out of 60, is that bad? Is that good? Right, it's like 10%. Okay, fantastic. If it was just that in and of itself, you'll probably take a conservative approach and then want to try to kind of do a bit more analysis. In this case, we've built up a number of IOCs that we were able to confidently understand basically where it originated from, what the file was doing. Now we need to move on understanding the scope and impact. So what other machines do we see this file on, and what other machines have we seen beaconing out to this, this suspicious domain? In this particular case, it was just the one machine. And I think in part because of that initial containment, that initial automated isolation from the Managed Threat Detection Service, contained that, that machine. Further investigation, again, part of the Threat Intelligence Service, looked at, this was the first stage. The second stage would then initiate a Cobalt Strike download, and then that's when things would have gotten really interesting. Fortunately, it didn't get to that stage. So, we've detected the event, we've got a good understanding of the impact and scope of the event. What's our containment, eradication and recovery? Well, in this case, it was relatively straightforward. We had automatic containment, fantastic. Interestingly, the endpoint detection, the antivirus software didn't pick it up. It was effectively the managed SOC service that saw the beaconing of the traffic out. So that's what was contained. We isolated the malware. So what we mean by that is we took that malware, put it onto a separate machine that's specific for incident response. You don't want to be just copying that file onto your file share in any way, shape or form. We removed that malware from the device itself. We updated our firewall and EDR solution to block the beaconing out, and implemented rules on an EDR solution to look for that hash and then remove that if it was if it appeared up again. The next step was there any sensitive data exfiltrated out? Now this can be tricky. The communications up to the domain was encrypted, so we couldn't actually dive into what was occurring there. But then we looked at if you look at the 40-gate logging that we've got here, a lot of the data that's been sent out was device information. There was no massive upload of data. We didn't see any file access to sensitive stores. We obviously looked for things like, were there any access from that user to things like SharePoint and so forth. Wasn't the case. We reset their password just out of a case of caution. We then initiated as part of this, we initiated our incident response plan, of course. We reached out to our partners, so we reached out to AusCert, for example, provide some additional guidance, and then ultimately reformat that image reformat the device and put that back into circulation. So we were confident at this stage that we got the incident contained, that we then moved into our post-incident activity. So we did our debrief, we looked at what controls worked, what didn't work. We looked at the way that our incident response plan, how our cybersecurity incident response plan, how that helped or hindered. Did the playbooks apply in this case? We identified as part of the analysis the vulnerabilities and configuration hardening that needed to be done, and then we implemented action plans to make sure that those hardening actions were resolved. So at that point, we then closed off the incident, and we made sure that that was everybody was happy, and then our action plans and cybersecurity incident response plan were updated from the lesson learned activity. Then we get on to this ransomware event.
Chris, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
You know, you said earlier that there was like 6 out of 60 people as reported it. Do you have since you found that it was a genuine thing, can you feed back into that, make it 7? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's 6 out of 60. They're in virus total. They're the sort of the antivirus vendors, right? So you would have, Microsoft and Trend and Sophos and all the players. The 6 out of 60 sort of refers to, of those 60, these 6 have seen this particular file, and they have classified it as malicious. So I uploaded when we were working this incident. That figure was actually 0. This was a new, like Sockgoulish has been around, but this was I guess a new variant. So that hash hadn't been seen before. So you upload the file, and all the researchers around the world will jump on that and investigate it. Now the file was really messy, you couldn't understand it. If you tried to analyse what the file was actually doing, it was basically not human readable. There are much smarter people out there that do this in their sleep, malware analysis, and what they'll do is they'll go and investigate it, and that's where you'll have like the community comments put in place. We can upload it and say we believe this is part of, say, a Sockgoulish campaign, for example, but generally speaking, the vendors, those 60 antivirus vendors, would need to run it through their sandbox detection engines, and then you will see that slowly populate up. Does that happen to you, Christian? Yeah. Okay, so let's, because whilst we're here at Loreto, let's talk about the Loreto incident. I want to sort of dive a little bit deeper into it because it's it was quite an interesting incident to work on from an incident management point of view. So, what was the initial detection? Well, the initial detection was a phone call from the threat actor saying, we've got complete control of your network and we've deployed ransomware. Now, I think at the word ransomware, the person on this side of the phone hung up. Right, okay, all right, great. That's all the information that we had to work on. So, I get the call from the IT manager here saying, this is what's happened. What do we do? Okay, all right, let's take those 10 breaths, right? Let's just sort of calm the farm a little bit and then let's get into it. So the first thing you're looking for, right? You're looking for, okay, have we seen any ransomware on the environment, right? Has anybody reported lovely sort of ASCII skull graphics appearing on their screens? No, nothing like that's occurred. Are we seeing any of the common ransomware extension names appearing in the network? Run a scan on over the environment? No, we're not seeing anything along those lines. All right, are we seeing anything weird and wacky in terms of authentication? On the VPN, no, everything there seems fine. And this is where knowing your normal and abnormal is really helpful, right? Because if you don't have any indicators or any real information here, going, have we seen anything abnormal becomes kind of pointless if you don't know what abnormal means. Yep. So we had nothing. But we had a phone call, and the phone call was, you know, it's like somebody calling in saying there's a bomb on the campus, right? You got to take it as legitimate. So we had to take this as legitimate. So we're going through. Now, part of the response, if we don't find anything, well, let's put tooling in place, right? Let's put detective tooling in place. The tooling that was in place at the moment wasn't quite up to scratch, and just, that was literally a month before where we presented to the board. It was almost like as if we staged this, right? No, that question's come up a couple of times. Where we said, okay, we need to improve the posture to be able to manage these things. So we installed tooling. In this particular case, we installed Sentinel-1 across all the managed endpoints, and that gave us visibility in what's actually happening on the devices then and there. It gave us really good, really detailed information. Crickets, nothing. Okay, all right. Because ransomware, once it's detonated, it's pretty noisy, right? You kind of know it's there. Right, okay. Let's put other tooling in, right? Let's see what else we can put in. So we enabled the threat detection service out of Sentinel-1 called Vigilance. And that's sort of human SOC sitting on top. Nothing. Okay, all right, just to be sure, we've got a second managed detection service. We'll put that across the environment. Again, nothing. So this was after the first 2 or 3 days. We had 2 different types of endpoint protection software installed, both with a managed threat detection service overlay on top of them, and both were coming up with nothing, right? The environment was quiet as mouse. Rightio. So, what do we do now? Right, you got nothing. Then I think we get another phone call. The boarding house gets another phone call saying, basically, hey, why haven't we heard from you guys? You know, we've got ransomware in your environment. Why haven't you called us back? I don't know, feeling lonely or something. So then there's pressure on finding something, right? Leadership's starting to really get concerned now because emails and phone calls are coming in. And then we see this, right? You would have seen the screenshot there from David's presentation. This is the threat actors dark web blog post saying we are after a $200,000 ransomware ransom for Loreto Normanhurst. Now, your security researchers monitor these blogs, right? And so out in the open web, on Twitter, all of a sudden, Loreto Normanhurst is starting to get well known for a cybersecurity incident. Now, we talk about cybersecurity incident and management and so forth as a human operation as opposed to a tech operation. I could tell you, as soon as you start getting in the news, it very much becomes a human concern. So, at this time, so probably from my perspective, after a couple of days, I'm thinking, is this a case of mistaken identity? We can't assume that at this stage because we don't know anything. But if you Google Loreto Normanhurst is the first to appear, right? And so if you're a threat actor from overseas, you've got no idea of how education works here in Australia, you're going to go, oh, I've got this school, Loreto, I'm going to Google it. Oh, it must be Loreto Normanhurst, right? I'm working on a theory there. But we heard the sister school has been compromised. Okay, could it be them? Could this threat actor be targeting the Loreto group of schools, right? Is this, again, a precursor to something that is going to hit Normanhurst very shortly? So all these questions were going around in our mind. We were trying to get IOCs off the sister school. To this day, we still haven't received any indicators of compromise. It might have been at that stage they didn't have it themselves, but I was screaming for it to say, because I want to know if we've seen any of this in the Normanhurst environment. So one of the kind of say positive side effects of being put up on the threat actors blog post here is they put a proof of hack, right, which is a file dump or a file tree dump, which shows basically the file structure of all the files that they've siphoned off, and there was a lot, like gigs and gigs and gigs of really sensitive data, and plus a sample of the files that they've produced. So we went through that as part of our investigation, and it quickly became very apparent that all these files dealt with the sister school. So at that point, and there was kind of a hard decision to make, right? Because we've still got no IOCs. There's been no hits in any of the telemetry that we've put in. How do we close this off, right? And that's where we sat down and spoke with David, spoke with the principal, acting principal at the time, and then it was a mutual decision, guided by Loreto Normanhurst, to say, okay, we now consider this incident to be closed. So it's kind of like you go through this exciting story and then you wake up and it's just a dream, right? You kind of had that anticlimactic approach to it, but I think it's a really useful indication of where you can come up with the best laid plans, but it all sort of, you may have the best plans until you get punched in the face, right? So being flexible. So I just want to sum up because I want to make sure that we head off to lunch. So recommendations. You've got your three kind of key pillars of preparing for a cybersecurity incident response. You're developing the plan, developing your playbooks, practicing them. Outside of that, we want to make sure we've got our multi-control levels in place. We want to make sure we're logging as much as we can. Having baseline logging is critical. Without logs, you can't detect. You can't detect, you can't respond. You want to understand what's normal, what's abnormal. Key to, we're going to take one thing away from this, from a technical point of view. Make sure you've got time sync across everything, right? It's nothing worse trying to correlate events if time's not synced. If you go into incident management, record everything that you do. Record the actions, record the commands that you run, timestamp them. If it needs to go to court, this is all going to make things much smoother. Know who to call and when to call. Are you calling your cyber insurer? Are you calling AIS? Are you calling ACS? Are you calling the cops? Understand your containment controls. So in that first incident, one of the things that we've realised, the host was isolated, but our EDR solution couldn't get to it because it was isolated. And we utilised our EDR solution to do a whole lot of sort of incident investigation. So understand what your containment controls are and what sort of impact that they have. Confirm your authority to action. What we mean by this is, what do you have the authority to do without consulting leadership, without consulting the principal? Can you bring down payroll? Can you bring down the whole entire network if need be? Get that confirmed in writing, and that's going to make your life easier. Debrief after your incident, right? Vital, right? That post-incident activity is critical. It's the only way in which you're going to learn. It's the only way in which you're going to improve. And on that, I will leave it there. Questions, comments, or lunch?
What happened to the sister school? You know what I mean? Like, did they not make it? Are they not eating?
We kind of have to be a little bit politically correct. So we can't mention the sister school by name. We don't know, to be honest with you. I know, maybe I should have prepared something like that, right? But I know, Dave, do you know? Like, it was definitely, they were definitely hit. They were definitely compromised.
Look, my principle is that asking me not to mention the school. It is public knowledge, it is out there, but we just want to make it on that. We don't want to impact their process, what they did. They were learning in that whole space. We definitely tried to communicate, give us more information. But they were a bit of a world of pain, trying to work out how they were doing there.
So they were a world of pain, I can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it took them a good couple of months to fully recover and understand what the scope was.
I'm going to come from a different perspective. I'm actually a parent here, and I just say from a parent's perspective of the communication that came out from the school, it was really clear, it was really, it wasn't a whole lot of jungo, messed up and saying, oh, this is what's happening. It was just, this is it, we're dealing with the issue, and then the communication was there straight away.
When did that point? When did that come out?
I think almost instantaneous.
Yeah, look, to be perfectly honest, it's all recorded. I can't actually remember when we communicated with parents. Like I said, I know we communicated with staff about a week after until once the Twitter stuff started coming out, all right, and we were getting calls from a range of different cyber experts going, we've seen this as well. We're getting all sorts of injections in the space. So, look, really, again, how and what and when we communicate is a massive exercise. We have lots of advice. I think Mike mentioned, getting a law firm involved. We were on the phone with them, working with comms constantly in that space. In our instance, we didn't know what was going wrong, and there was nothing going wrong. So how do you communicate nothing to people, and yet it's also happening? So I don't know exactly when it came out. Probably around about, I think the sort of, again, once we get even the general web in terms of Twitter feeds, that sort of stuff, then we jumped on it straight away at that point. And if we may even got it beforehand, depending upon exactly the time frame. Look, it wasn't in the first 2 or 3 days, that's just for sure. Okay, until we got a better understanding of it, until we went, there's nothing here. We've done all our checks, we've got it, it's still not happening. And yet we're still getting the odd calls in that space.
I know I was in communication with the leadership team on when should the comms go out, what sort of comms should happen. And then there was really close collaboration between net strategy or the incident response, the technical incident response team, the legal firm, because they brought in their own technical capabilities as well. So there was this really sort of close collaboration between leadership and these working elements of the group. I mean, if you kind of think about it, this incident was probably the most realistic tabletop exercise you could ask for, right? So kudos for training, mate.
Chris, one of the things that we found, telecommunication plans, figuring out when does the OAIC get involved.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to make sure communication happened in the right order with the right amount of information. So having it, it's very dependent upon the nature of the incident. So it's just something that's worth everyone understanding, I guess, that the OAIC, I think it might be mentioned actually, you need to get in there quickly if you suspect exfiltration.
Yeah. So the Australian Information Commissioner needs to be notified if you suspect that there's a significant data breach. Again, I can't stand up here and say it should be done at this point. Notifying the Information Commissioner involves a whole set of processes that will go well beyond the lifetime of the incident. So that's something that should be consulted with leadership, with your legal team. But asking when should we do that, like when should we kick that off, should be established in your cybersecurity incident response plan. Was there another? Sorry.
I just wanted to ask about when it's about still having a managed service provider, when it comes to the cybersecurity documents, who creates them, who's the owner of those documents? Is it the third party, the managed service provider? Does the school provide the managed service provider all these, disaster management, cybersecurity documents? Who's the owner?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So the question was, with the managed service agreement that NetStrategy and Loreto have, who manages the incident response plan and these documents? And I think this is one of sort of an earlier question. So at that stage, Loreto was, from a technical perspective, relying on NetStrategy's incident response plan and processes, because we controlled the technology effectively. But the Loreto's critical incident response plan also kicked in at a level. Does that help answer?
School does have their own incident
Correct.
response
Yeah,
plan.
yeah.
We can apply that onto the cybersecurity IT.
Yeah, but we recommend that you should have a very specific cybersecurity incident response plan. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I've just.
The school will still own the cybersecurity incident response plan. Okay. But it's very much built, depending upon how your managed service provider works, with them, because they're doing a lot of the technical work in that space.
No, I'm just mindful of time. I'm getting to wrap up. So maybe one more question and then we'll finish up.
About the insurance company.
Yep.
Where were they notified? Were they notified? Did they become part of that sort of?
They were notified very early on as well. One of the first contacts we did make to reach out to them. They were involved again to validate the work that was being done. The fact that it wasn't actually an incident, they sort of took a step back in that space because they couldn't come in and check anything. There was nothing wrong. We just engaged them from a comms. We engaged them from a technical perspective to say, NetStrategy, you're doing X, Y, and Z. Is that right? Just to give the school confidence that we rely on NetStrategy, but we weren't experts in this space here. So we got the law firm and their legal and their technical team involved. We got the cybersecurity guys involved. This is what we're doing. Is this right? Does everybody agree with all these steps? What else can we do? What are we missing? So they're engaged. They weren't driving it. The technical lead was NetStrategy in this incident.
Okay. If you have any questions, come hunt me down at lunchtime. But otherwise, thank you.
You've all been very, very well behaved, so you're going to get an extended lunch time through to 2:15, and then we've got an absolutely magnificent panel for you to come back to. We've been warming up with all of the excellent speakers so far this morning. Wait till you see what comes after lunch. 2:15 back in here. Please drop in and see all the sponsors, and we'll see you back at 2:15. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Hey, we got David from Central Coast. That's good. He can hear, so everyone else should be able to hear as well. Thank you very much. We're almost at the end. One more session to go. Thank you for braving the cold, making it this far without thawing too much. Next session will be a panel discussion on the topic of advanced monitoring and cloud security. I do want to kind of throw a big shout out to our panelists. We do have Lucas Simonson and Mary Lou O'Brien from Redlands. You guys can come up now. Give them a clap. We also have Brenton Hardy from PLC Melbourne. You can give him a clap too. There we go. And we've got James Stewart from Barker. Give him a clap as well. Beautiful. And this panel discussion will be headed up by Dave Nichols from Central Coast Grammar. So we'll hand it over to you guys. Dave's going to grab a chair. Enjoy.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming here today. Look, I'm going to hand over to these guys to introduce themselves because it's not really about me. I just get to answer questions and don't have to seem smart today. So I'll hand over to you first, James.
How's it going? Getting logical all across. So I'm James Stewart, the head of ICT at Barker College, which is just a couple of colleges from here. Very grateful to be hosted because I'm only about 5 minutes walk that way, so it's a nice easy trip in. So my role at Barker College, I'm the executive there. Of course, looking after everything which is ICT and data related is there. And this is a bit of a preamble, as I'll be talking later on. I'm going to mention a couple of products and companies. That one. Okay. So to all those in the live stream, if you missed it, head of ICT, Barker College, etc. Cutting to it, so I'll be mentioning a couple of products and services. I'm not here to spruik these companies. I'm not here to say they're great, they're fantastic. It's not a sales pitch, but I also aren't mentioning them. I mention them because they're working well for us, and so that, you know, if you want to talk to me about it afterwards, I'm happy to do so. But please don't take what I say in the future as a sales pitch. It's not intended as that.
Thank you. My name is Lucas Simonson. I'm the Infrastructure and Cybersecurity Lead at Redlands, so part of the ICT Management Committee there. So I work under Mary Lou and sort of the day-to-day operations of infrastructure and cybersecurity there. So yeah.
Thank you. Mary Lou O'Brien, Director of Digital Innovation at Redlands. And I pleaded with Lucas to join me on the stage today because this panel could get far more technical than what I'm used to. I work more at a strategic level on the executive team and oversee the team of 16 that we have here at Redlands.
Brenton Hardy from PLC in Melbourne, or what we like to call the original PLC. And thanks for the round of applause earlier.
All right, thank you for that. I will point out as well, we've got a Slido section up if you want to ask questions throughout this, because we tried to think of some questions but also wanted to open it up to the floor. I was going to have a slide, but we didn't have it going. So if you go to slido.com and put in the code 3370971, you'll be able to ask questions, and put your hand up later if you want me to repeat that number again. But feel free to throw questions in there. Yeah, I'll repeat it again. 3370971. All right, so the first question I've got is, does your school currently leverage a SIEM or a managed SIEM with a SOC to monitor multiple infrastructure layers? And is it cloud or local or both? I'll open it to whoever wants to answer first.
I'll start off. Yeah, we've only put in a SIEM SOC XDR this year, so maybe a bit late to the party. Again, I'll say what James said before. The products that we're using are just the products we're using. It's not necessarily an endorsement as such. We've gone with a company called Secure ISS. I think they're Queensland based. And I think they've got a fair few schools in the room. They were a product that was well priced for us. I know that there are some schools that have been hit in Victoria that have gone in much bigger than what we've gone in, so they're sort of paying 2 to 3 times the amount of what we're paying. And of course, you get what you pay for. So there's certain sort of exclusions that happen to make it come in at that price point. So they're our SEAM, well, they're our SOC. And they take our logs from our servers and from various infrastructure, and they pump it up into QRadar, their SEAM, and we've got Sentinel-1 deployed across quite a fair bit of our infrastructure, but not all of our infrastructure.
We're actually with the same group, and whilst Lucas might talk about the technical aspects of what they do, from my position, I do join in on the meetings that we have with them regularly, and my experience with them has been fantastic in that they speak plain language that I can understand when they're talking about highly technical aspects of what they're doing and what they're tracking, that they are excellent at their communication and how they get the message across to everyone in the team to make that relatable.
So yeah, Brenton did a great job of explaining how our sort of secure ISS works. We've been with them probably just coming up on 2 years now. So we've sort of seen that growth of sort of being a proof of concept into sort of full-scale deployment. So I think we're ingesting anywhere around 1.3 billion logs a month. So quite a lot's going in there, and not, from my point of view, not enough is going in there. I'd still like to see some more. But yeah, it's a reliable product. We've had a couple of instances where we've had phone calls at certain times, which have been great, though there've been false alarms. Yeah, it's great to have that sort of backing and that sort of security behind us.
Well, if I mentioned Secure ISS, that'd be 3 for 3, wouldn't it? And yes, we are another Secure ISS company, or customer, I should say. But a couple of things around it and why we chose that. Number one, of course, is price point, and I do thank AIS New South Wales for the great pricing that is there. The second is the SOC, and that's really important. And I think we probably have a similar amount of logs that go in. All our primary devices, our switches, our servers, all our core infrastructure, all logs into that. And we'll talk a bit more about that and other sources we're feeding into that. They deal with hundreds of thousands of events that happen across our system every month. Of those hundreds of thousands, the reports back to us, and this is where their reports are really good, they probably have to eyeball about 30 a day. Now, they may not eyeball it for long, but they eyeball it a little bit, so a human actually intervenes, in addition to the AI that they're using with their IBM technology. And then we get about 5 to 6 a month that gets escalated to us. And that is invaluable. It's really invaluable. And that's one of the reasons that we did this, is because we have that SOC across it. We've probably gone a little bit further. We also use a company called CyberCX, and we have something called DFIR, which is their Data Forensics and Investigation Response. And we also have a subscription to that as well. So in the event of a P1, not only can Secure ISS take action on our network and stop stuff, but they also must alert CyberCX, who will come into that and review and start to work together as well. For me, at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's an amazing thing, and I know there are some of you who are on call locally and you get texts at 2 in the morning. Yeah. Yep. But, my team, like your team, we work regular ICT hours, but I don't expect my team to be always on call, and the threat actors out there aren't always operating to our daily time zone. So that is why cloud, and that's what we're doing there.
Can I ask you a quick question, Brenton, on that? Because obviously Mary Lou, James and Lucas are all in New South Wales, and I'm assuming took advantage of the great pricing AIS did. Do you get advantage of that pricing, or have you picked it purely because it's the best product out there that you found for the price it is?
I don't know that we do get advantage of that pricing, although I was having a chat to Graham earlier in the day that there are some pricings available to AIS New South Wales that are potentially available across the country. On certain things, and Marcus is still there. Yeah, we should talk. So I don't know. Maybe we could have done that cheaper than what we've done it, but it is substantially cheaper than the other things that we were looking at.
Yeah. While it's passing off, I will say AIS, for those who are watching from the stream, although they are New South Wales based, or the AIS New South Wales, a lot of the deals Marcus and co have been working on are available to other states, so reach out either through Mitie to them if you want to question that. I know the great work he did with 1Password is available to anyone in Australia, is that correct? Yeah, anyone in Australia. You just need to sign up and reach out to them. So it is a great feature even if you're outside of the state.
Look, we did do due diligence beforehand. We didn't just jump onto Secure ISS because of some cheap deal that was organised by the, our association, though we did appreciate it. We had looked at a lot of other companies and what they offered and had those long conversations. The price point was probably good for corporate, but we in education don't always like to pay those amount of money. And the services that we saw coming from Secure ISS versus the others was very similar at a very good price point. So we had been looking, we couldn't justify it in budget, we were finding it hard to get it through approvals. It was easier. So yes, we did do our due diligence. Yes.
No, thank you for that. All right, I might skip that question because I think it was just answered. No, that's right. Do you utilise advanced security systems, and can you give an example of such system and why you've chosen it to any of you, and the benefits that they've provided to the overall security posture of your school?
Yeah, so probably from our software sort of security stack, the ones that stand out for me are sort of Mimecast and some of our XDR providers. Mimecast, if you don't know, email security provider. We use them for our email gateway as well. So they sit in front of Microsoft, and if Microsoft was ever to go down, Mimecast would still be up. So we use them quite heavily for email security and sort of detection of email business compromise. So we've had a couple of scenarios, and I was one of those that raised my hand earlier, where we've had students send out spam emails after emails get compromised or their credentials get compromised. When we've rolled out Mimecast at that time, that immediately fell. That product sort of just jumped in and went, great, no, they're all spam. Don't even let them get delivered. We still had to rectify the problem with sort of credentials being managed, but at least that stopped our sort of reputational damage from there. The one product feature we liked about that was integrations with the other products we have. So Palo Alto switches, firewalls. It could talk to each other. So if it detected a known sort of bad website or something like that came out through one of the emails, it could feed it into the firewall, so it would be blocked on our premise as well.
The advantage of coming to things like this, even being on the panel, is just take a biro and write some of those things down. We'll be looking into that soon. Yeah, look, we've got a raft of things. I don't know what you'd call advanced systems and what's not. We're running Sophos actually I think it's MDR, isn't it? Sophos MDR across a fair bit of our fleet, which is what we had before we put the SIEM into place. I've got a whole list of things here. I don't want to spoil the illusion that these panels happen and these questions are just ad hoc. And it's the first time I've heard that question because, hey, I got a whole bunch of notes that I put down beforehand. What I might do is I just point out too that we've just gone through a big piece doing DMARC and getting ourselves up to speed with DMARC. And the protections that should give us is that should reduce the amount of, probably the amount of spear phishing, I guess, that we see in some regards. And we hadn't had that done until quite recently. That's just been a project that's been delivered at the start of this year, and it's been in monitoring phase up until now to see what sort of emails are coming in that shouldn't be coming in or going out that shouldn't be going out, and we're about to switch that on after a period of monitoring.
Oh, look, we can all name services, etc., etc. Look, we're a mainly Microsoft house. And so I'm sure you're all aware of it, but what's available in the Microsoft stack in this space, and that is in the A5 licensing purview and everything around it, it is huge. And we leverage that really hard, but not as well as we should have, or should, I should say. And so we're leveraging that, and we're using that a lot to monitor and see what's happening within our stack, and it gives us very good visibility. In terms of alerting through that and getting good alerting through it, look, we're sending that off through to our SOC, and so Secure ISS is monitoring all that, which is fantastic. We got a phone call only a few days ago about abnormal activity from Israel, so it is working. But that is a great tool. So if you do have the A3 or A5 stack, there's a lot of tools in there that you can use. But some other things just to add in there. One of the biggest threats that exists out there is business compromise and business email compromise. So Mimecast, my colleague on the right, we're using abnormal security. Again, another fantastic AIS New South Wales deal. I was so excited when I came out, I piloted straight away and spent a lot of time learning our network. And it's really reduced the amount of spam that's coming through. So we are at A5 once again. We have that operating as our filter. But what has been stopped by using that and the visibility into it is just amazing. And the machine learning that it's using to make all these determinations, we have found highly invaluable. So something like the Mimecast or that is great. In terms of other intelligence systems out there, we use something called friendly phishing. Again, that's owned by CyberCX. You probably hear a bit of a theme when I talk about our work that we do with them. But that is also a fantastic solution that we use. Why I like it in particular, apart from just doing phishing, it actually then rates and scores. It then ties back into my directory and looks at the roles of people and the documents that they've got to actually look at risk profiles, to then bring those risk profiles up to know that's an executive or they're an ICT leader. It then is looking at their behaviour patterns that are going on to say they actually aren't operating in a safe manner, and we'll highlight it and report through. And then as part of that as well, it'll actually take them to the training modules that it needs to say, as a user, you have failed this, or we're seeing this behaviour, here are training modules that you need to do, and I can then see whether the staff are doing that, and I can have conversations around it. That is really invaluable in reducing that risk of business email compromise, so I love that. And one other tool, I'm just throwing some of the tools that we use out there. We don't have the answer. This is what's working for us and why we do it. Another thing, even though we'd have MFA for our staff, is MFA we don't have for our students at this point in time, so you can get password compromise. We actually use a system called SpecOps, and we still have some AD on site, and SpecOps is actually monitoring all the known lists of all the compromised emails. It will lock an account immediately that goes on that list, automated, and force that change as well. That has also helped us with compromise, especially with our student body, because let's face it, as I said beforehand, we have a wide variety of users. So we have pre-K, so they're all 5 years old, up until our 17 and 18-year-olds. Digital natives they may be, digital wisdom they don't always have. And of course, the executive functions of a young child is difficult, and so their password could be dog or cat 123. You can't ask much more. Easily compromised, easy changed. So having this service behind the scenes definitely helps with that. And whilst it may not be protecting the whole school's data, because let's face it, our students going to see a subset of data, it's still protecting their data, and that's important. So some of the tools that we operate. But it's just not just about the tool, it's also that interoperability, and it's linking in with other systems, and that's where the power comes in. It's the interoperability. There you go.
We had a story earlier on about our cyber insurer offers us a phishing tool as part of their app. And at one stage we launched it a couple of years ago, and I said to Lucas, I don't believe that we're not getting any hits on these links that are coming out from this insurance app. What we realised was that Mimecast were blocking all of them. So now we are looking at another product as well.
Whitelist.
I'll ask one of these questions just before we go to some of the questions that are coming in. Can I just ask the streamer to check that the sound is going through the stream? Because there was a question up for a minute saying no sound, so if you can just double check, please. With the systems we've been putting in, and it seems like you guys have got a myriad of systems, much more than I have, how much of a concern is the budget when you're dealing with these, and how do you go about getting it across the line, whether that's with your business manager, your executive? Because in some of these cases you're coming to them and saying, I want to spend a whole bunch of money that will, well, on face value, doesn't get seen in the classroom. So is that something you struggle with, you find issues? Any tips you've got for getting it over the line?
I'll probably go from my perspective first, especially when I'm sort of developing a project or anything like that for Mary Lou. I'm doing the research up front and sort of having a look at what's out there on the market and going, okay, this is probably going to be the best product for us, and then developing that project plan from there and getting that budget approval from there, not really going to Mary Lou and saying, hey, I want this money to do this, and then they're going, no, you can't do that. So I think from my side, it's finding the product that you really want or is going to best suit you, and then getting that sort of money from there.
And I'm assuming that lines up with like your cyber incident plan or your protection plan the school has in place?
Yeah, and I think like any leader, don't come to me with your problems, come to me with your solutions, and I rely on Lucas's expertise in this space. So I would expect that he would come with a very thorough business plan, and then I take that to the exec. I sit on the exec. If you come at anything from a risk perspective and link it back to risk, you've got a very good chance of getting it approved. And I find that's the best way. Currently, too, wellbeing is a really important aspect. So if it links into staff wellbeing in any respect, you've got a good chance of getting it through as well. But it all comes down to that preparation. Every single budget request must have a business case supporting it, and we do that for every bit of software as well as every budget request.
Never waste a crisis. They're the words that have held me in good stead at this late stage of my career. Never waste a crisis. So yes, business case, and we're all in it together, and risk and all that. And we had Chris Gersh come out recently and speak to our board, which has got them asking for more reporting from me. So that's worked well. And our executive are asking for more reporting for me, so that's also worked well. But you never waste a crisis, and sadly, there are schools geographically very close to us in Melbourne that have been hit in recent times, and you can just drop that into conversation around the water cooler. I see that so and so has just been hit, and they've been hit as well. Oh, poor them. And so yes, you can have that business case and all that, and that's great, and you should do those things. But as it was getting geographically closer, it was becoming more and more of an imperative, because we're all going to get hit at some stage, but you want to try and be the last one to get hit rather than the first one.
And how long can you keep a crisis to use for? So I've, like a lot of other schools, have had issues where we've been hit in the past. Last one was, for us, a really good one. It was 2 days before people were coming on site for a Mitie Day. How long do you think you can keep using that example to get more, or do you have to find another one after some period of time?
I call it different things, but I don't call it the same thing all the time. No, it's been going on for quite some time now, because security is the new black. And we're having an entire day on it here, and I come along to these things and it's very enjoyable, but as the day goes on it gets less and less and less enjoyable, doesn't it? Because we all find all these things that we need to be doing, and it's just never ending. And so it is in schools that our executive ask good questions, and our board asks good questions, and coming to things like this, I'm writing down stuff here that we should be doing. I've got a huge list of the stuff we are doing, but not all the things that have been mentioned here we're doing currently. So back I go and whack a few more things on the budget, and it's one of those things. I mean, in our jobs you've got to be many things, but you've got to be very much a salesperson too, don't you? That when you take these things to your board, when you take these things to your executive, you've got to make a really good case. I can see here that I've got a line item for such and such that's going to be $35,000. No? Ooh, okay. Good luck. I can see that you're accepting that risk then, are you? Because I've brought it to you. So my conscience is clear. You're accepting that risk. Great. Good.
You got something to finish that question up, James?
Yeah, look, I'll take it the back of that. So where Brendan was going with that, you don't always have a good crisis to leverage. And sometimes we don't actually want a good crisis. We've got other things that we need to do. But look, I'm going to flip that question a little bit, and that's where Brendan was going. It's not actually about the budget and how to get it approved. I think it's actually a conversation starting the other way. You're actually starting with your board, and you're being very clear that they understand the risk and they have it there, and it's clearly communicated and discussed. Now, I know I'm lucky. I get to go to some board meetings. Maybe I'm unlucky, but whichever way. And then there's multiple committees of our board. There's a governance and compliance committee. There's an ICT, and they're both subcommittees, and I again, get to go to those, aren't I lucky? But it's really good because I get to have those conversations in depth with that board around the risk. And cybersecurity for my school, this is the second year at its number one risk, and we think it's going to be the number one risk for the school in the next year as well. So they are owning that risk and they're understanding that risk. If you don't have that seat, and Mike talked a little bit about this as well, you need to be talking to people who can actually get there. Because once the risk is understood, once you have that ownership at that level, then the budget and the requirements coming in under that, and you're actually having the conversation about, well, here is our vision, here's our plan, here's our strategy to mitigate this risk, and you're getting it owned there. So you're not having a conversation about individual items, they'll come up. You're talking about a strategy and a plan which is signed off to mitigate a risk that they have owned. And that's the way I think you should try and approach it. Harder, or not always as easy to do in some schools, and I get that. Really happy to chat to schools about how you might have a better voice. The other thing is try and find, I call them Coalition of the Willing. If you ever read any of Cotter's work about change management, Coalition of the Willing is a great thing as well. So I'm lucky that I've got a Director of Risk and Compliance, like in a large school that I do. We work very, very closely together, and we champion each other and support each other through. We also sometimes professionally disagree, and that it ends up in being, I hope, a better solution. I have a very supportive COO as well when it comes to doing all this work. And so the three of us are very much working in partnership together. So it's not just my voice, it's a collective voice talking back to the board about a risk they've accepted and they want mitigated, and they're willing to invest in to do that. So it's not about the individual item, it's about the actual strategy and the whole journey. So I'm turning it for me.
Always good to make it harder for us, James.
I'm not trying.
Do you see any current gaps in your current cyber cloud and monitoring framework? And what is your school doing to proactively address those?
Do I want to mention them publicly? Probably not. It's
Don't
only
worry
being streamed on YouTube. Okay, that's fine. So there's a back door over here. No. Look, I think with any environment there will be some vulnerabilities. I think from the mitigations and sort of risks that we're taking, we're sort of just taking them one by one. Once we sort of come up with that strategy to go from great, we know where this sort of problem is, let's have a product that fixes it, or however we can fix it, and then sort of go from there. Yeah.
So does that mean you'd add it to your risk registry, give it a rating, and see whether it's worth keeping using or not?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we would sort of evaluate what it is. And I think this is where it probably comes from Mary Lou's point of view, where we sort of will go, okay, this is a big enough risk for us to action now. Let's take this. Let's make this the priority now.
I'm not going to publicly talk about where we know our gaps to be. It's a bit like the example beforehand of having this lovely safe in the middle of the room and everyone can see it and is aware of it, and then, of course, you might actually know where a key is to get into it. I'm going to actually talk about our process of identifying risk and gaps and how we process with that. So we're currently going through ISO 27001 certification. It's a beast of a journey. It's probably not the right thing for all schools, but what was really good was actually the gap analysis and actually going through the gaps that we've got to actually be certified. We may not actually get to certification, but what we will do is use that report and subsequent reports to improve process, and that very much highlighted our gaps for us and where to go with that. So it's really clear. And of course, I think as was talked about beforehand with the human element, if you look at things like ISO, with the controls, I think it's 40%-ish. Mike, if I get it wrong, let me know, are actually ICT. The rest of them are all organisational related controls as well. So the gaps aren't just about technology gaps, they're about whole organisation gaps as well. So I'm not saying go do ISO certification, it's a beast, but the gap analysis and getting something along those lines is really, really beneficial. The other thing is that, and we had this kind of conversation beforehand, whilst we're doing ISO, we actually report on the NIST framework to our board. We found it a bit difficult to report on an ISO framework that is easy for them to understand. Again, using that framework and actually assessing yourself on that, which is what Dave showed at one point, it also shows you where your gaps are by using those frameworks. So I think where I'm coming from is I'm not going to tell you what my gaps are, but use frameworks, be it ISO, be it NIST. Find a framework that works for you. I would agree Essential 8 is limited in some ways. Find that framework, it will help you identify the risks, and then you develop your strategies around that to proactively address it over time. And it's iterative, yes, you can't do it all together. And the example of the elephant, the problem is the elephant keeps getting bigger. But yeah, for me this is not about what my gaps are, it's about the process to identify and rectify those gaps.
It's quite a baton pass. Yeah, look, no, we haven't got any gaps. I'm so sad to hear you've all got these problems. The biggest gap we would have, which I could talk about, is the human element of it, is people, and we too have gone down the friendly fishing route. As one aspect of trying to uplift our people. We were on KnoBe4, which is a fine product. We were on KnoBe4 for about 5 years, and everybody just sort of got used to KnoBe4, to be honest. And then we moved over to friendly fishing, and I think we should just keep moving every few years if we can find another product, because I had people contacting me. As a science teacher who contacted me and said, well done, I've gotten caught. You know, years and years and years of picking all these fishing campaigns, and finally you got me. And I had a look at the template and I thought, well, that would have got me as well, to be honest. It was pretty damn good. So we've been doing that to uplift our staff. We've also just started, well, we haven't actually done it yet, but we've got Chris, who was presenting earlier in the day, if he's still around somewhere. Chris is coming down to present to all of our staff shortly. As I told you before, the great success that he had presenting to our board and the ramifications for me on that. So I think after he presents to our staff, it should go quite well.
All right, thank you for that. One of the questions here is also one that's been asked by a few people, but it sounds like your answer to this is going to be secure ISS, which is, the question was, how do you deal with alert noise? Because I'm a school that uses Greylog, which means, you know, if I've got a filter on one of my logs, it sends me 1,000 alerts when that filter gets activated. Do you have that issue with your platforms, or it's really good at filtering out those ones that don't really need to be an issue?
Yeah. We've definitely monitored, sort of managed the way the alert processing works. Secure ISS does have that sort of P1 matrix, where depending through certain hours, they have the ability to do stuff, or during business hours, we will have to give the authorization. It's kind of hard to say where we want to sit on that, because sometimes we do want to be alerted, but where does that stop? Is it 2 a.m. in the morning? Where is it? It is really hard because,
It's okay. It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
I'm going to show my age a little bit here. So when I was a few years ago, maybe, and I was a sysadmin at a school, once again up here on the lovely North Shore of Sydney, Microsoft Operations Manager had just come out, and it had lots of logging in. Stop laughing at me, Dave. And it was fantastic. It was going to go through all the logs on my Windows servers, and I was going to see when hard disks were full and all the rest of it, and be much more proactive. And I installed that and ran it out throughout everywhere, and then got bombarded by logs. Alrighty, I thought I can fix this, and I went in there and I was reading technical articles and all the rest of it, trying to reduce the logs, and I got it better, and I'm still being bombarded. Within weeks, I was just kind of skimming the emails, trying to find it, and within a few months I went and uninstalled the whole thing because it wasn't actually working for me. The point being that, you know, being drowned by logs is actually quite a problem if they're not configured properly. And this is where XDR solutions and where, you know, machine learning and AI can come very much to our advantage. And I think we need to be leveraging that. There's a lot of logs out there. Was it 1.13 billion, 1.3 billion of logs per month? Per month. And if you want to be able to see normal, you need to be logging, you know, success criteria as well as failure criteria. So there's a lot that's going through there. You need good systems to do that. And then the other thing is as well is the skill sets that we have within our schools. And we have wonderful people who work in our schools, but we generally are more the jack of all trades rather than the masters of something. And so even if you manage to get yourself a top flight CISO working for you, well, there's still one person, and they do go on holidays and they do get sick. And so this is where I think, SOCs, Secure ISS being one of them, are really good, where you can actually feed your logs to them and they can use their expertise and the tools that they've got, the machine learning, to then go through and help you do this, to actually know what to pull out, to be able to see that abnormal or not normal behaviour, be able to take some of that load for you, and then just give you the ones that actually your team need to deal with. Because ultimately, you know, we're there to protect the school, but we've got other things to do in the school as well, rather than go through logs and trying to go through false positives. So a very roundabout answer, but...
No, I like your last point there, and it's one I've used before at my school, which is, even if we've got the resources on site to do it, is it worth our time spending 3 hours a day trolling through logs when it's all wasted? Because we're not free. Like, yes, we're there, but the school's paying for us to be there. So it is a really good one, and I suppose that's where, for me, I'm currently doing it all with open source on-prem, but wasting a lot of time either trying to find the issues that are in there or just ignoring the ones that I shouldn't be ignoring. So maybe I'll have to have a talk to some people at my school about getting secure ISO.
And can I just say as well, these seams are not magic bullets. It took a while for ours to actually start to really work for us. We did actually have a penetration test, and it was amazing what it didn't pick up the first time, because it was trying to work out what normal was, yes? And so it's probably taken a good 12 to 18 months to get to a point now that we are relying on it and going, yes, we have confidence that it's actually interacting or stopping where it needs to. Before that, we had to have a lot more oversight on it. So it's not a case of go get a sock, a seam, whatever else, and it just works. It still takes time, and you need to be communicating back with the company or the vendor, about what is normal behaviour, and to actually go through and fine-tune it. It does take time.
All right, moving on, because we are getting near the end of our time, and I'm mindful we're going to be stopping people from either getting prizes or going home. One of the questions we've got here that's been submitted is, what is the best implementation options for geo-blocking, and how a school can achieve this without interrupting access for overseas students, parents and staff? It's a nice, easy question.
I can talk about it if you want. I love a post that I saw on Mitie only a few weeks ago about a lovely power order in PowerShell script. I think you commented on this too, didn't you? That's on your to-do list. It's on ours as well. Look, we don't have a solution, but that post was really interesting, where people could actually go in, say where they're going to be on leave, where they were going, and then those scripts would actually go through and unblock based upon those timeframes. We don't have an answer. We're looking at that. But if any of my esteemed panel members have got a better idea, they do.
Geo-blocking, did you actually have to run it past the executive, or did you just kind of do it and see who complained?
I might have made an executive decision about what was and what wasn't.
Fair enough.
So geo-blocking for us actually came out through the business email compromise scenario we had sort of end of 2019, start of 2020, which was also convenient around COVID. So we very quickly just blocked everyone, so only sign-ins from Australia, and only recently started to open things up again. We use conditional access through Microsoft and sort of limit it that way. Obviously, VPN access is only in Australia. But yeah, that's sort of the way we manage it is, staff and students have to log a ticket with us. We then put them in a sort of a group that's then sort of bypasses those rules, but we still have an understanding of where they're going to and where they've been. And we feed that information into Secure ISS as well, so that they know if they do see that sign in, it's okay, or if it's going completely different somewhere else, that's when they can step in and sort of block that.
I'm racking my brain trying to think where I heard a cybersecurity expert saying, it's the death of geo-blocking, that we've moved way past that. And I can't remember. There might be someone in the room here that knows the reasoning behind that, and I can't remember what it was. So I need to go back to LinkedIn and elsewhere to do that research. But as Lucas said, we are doing that, and it's quite a manual process for us.
We haven't traditionally done a lot of geo-blocking, and when we got the SOC in place, all of a sudden, ping, this teacher is logging in from Japan, which sort of got our attention. We do have multi-factor authentication for users off-site, so that made us a little less concerned. But then we found out that teacher was in Japan, as it turned out, was on leave. So we haven't done a lot around geo-blocking at the moment. We're basically sort of monitoring the situation. We use, you're talking about sort of other technologies that you use. We use CloudWorks as our identity management single sign-on provider, and there's a few things I like about that product. One of them is if you go to reset your password, there's the password mask that you're deciding that you want for your institution, but it also goes and checks the password that the user is trying to set against the 800,000, cracked passwords on the internet. So that's firstly nice. And secondly, we can set up MFA off-site, And we've been telling people, you need to use an authenticator app as well, so that when they travel, they're not trying to rely on getting a text message for MFA. So we're not doing a lot of blocking at the moment. We're just sort of monitoring things, and we haven't had a huge problem with that just as yet.
That's actually what it was. It was when we turned on MFA, and we have got MFA and anyone, and it is only for those off-site, and they do all have the app on their phones. And so I think it was that conversation as schools were launching into MFA that whoever it was at a conference was saying, so that negates geo-blocking. It's not the concern that it used to be.
Can I ask a quick question of everyone in the room here? You've all obviously got MFA on your staff at least, because the insurance companies a couple of years ago forced us all, which is a good thing. How many people actually whitelist your school that doesn't require MFA login? Yeah, 1, 2. Yeah, when you're on campus, do you need to have MFA and a connection? That's interesting, because for me, I just never made it an option. MFA 24/7, well, not 24/7, you're fine for 30 days, but yeah, I always find that interesting, because to me, some of the people that are going to try and hack the teacher's account are the students who are on the site. So I just always find that fascinating, those that do allow it and those who don't.
I think the one issue we found with that was teachers not having devices in the classroom. That was the big hurdle that we had. Teachers already didn't like the fact that they were using their personal numbers for a two-factor code. So that's a challenge that we're trying to overcome.
I think that comes down to the risks that you as an organisation are prepared to accept or not accept. For us, we've got threat actors and out there. Yes, like every school, we've got lots of little hackers who are exploring through there. Script kiddies. We've even had a couple of white hackers come through, which has been really good, and they've found vulnerabilities in our development. They've come and told us. One particular one, we rewarded them, so they then decided to go and find others for us and actually then start to get a bit more black than white. That's a whole other story. But the point being that we, like many other schools, don't enforce MFA internally, and that being the case, that even though we recognise the risk and the threat that are our students, we have other control mechanisms to mitigate that, and therefore it wasn't worth the hassle or the angst or the impact to user experience to bring it on, because our primary risk that we were identifying was actually external threat actors. Now, that's what we decided, that's what was right for our school, is different for every school, yes?
And look, for us at Central Coast Grammar School, we were pushing to MFA in like a 2-week period to make the insurance people happy, and I didn't even think of looking for that setting. So, and everyone was happy with it. So.
Yeah, but in addition to that, like we've done parents, so we now have parents on MFA, and our students will come across as well beginning of 2025. So, other schools aren't doing that. When they talk about MFA, they've done their staff and they've ticked it off. We haven't. We've actually gone through and actually looking at protecting all our accounts, because we've worked out as a student, you can see the entire directory, because Microsoft, and what you get from that directory is not insignificant, and then what can that be used for? So, as I said, different risks, different schools, different acceptance.
Look, I've got 2 last questions here we'll go through very quickly, just because they are interesting, and some more have just popped in, but we might have to handle them on the forum. The first is, did any of you experience big pushback from staff about MFA going onto a personal device, and how did you handle that?
3 staff. 3. We have 1,200 on our books. Okay, so I think it's also about the language, the change control, and their understanding. But we had a few. We ended up giving them a token. We had probably a few others who weren't exactly happy about it, but the majority went, and they went with it, and we had a chat to them. But we had 3. They've got a token, and we're about to roll from Cisco to Microsoft, and I've spoken to the 3 of them, and they're happy to use their devices. So I think it's part of your change management and your communications. It's also the normalising of MFA too, because the reality is now that other organisations, it's out there, it's getting their mobile phone. Adding one more for your workplace is not the end of the world. But yeah, it depends on the staff member.
Anything else to add to that?
No, that was it.
Okay. Last one here I think is for you, James, because you just mentioned it in the question before that. How are you doing multi-factor for students? Because you've said you're going to have it out in 2025, and that's something someone's asked. So.
Okay, good question. So we are not planning to do MFA internally once again. So if you're on site, we will trust you. Externally, for our secondary school students, they all have a device. Look, bought one earlier. There you go, show and tell. They have a device. When they log in at school, it automatically logs them on via their username, password, or Windows Hello. We do have cookies on that, which means that will stay that way. So they won't actually need MFA at home for a period of time because the cookie will time out. If they need a secondary school student, then they can install the app on their phone and do it that way. But once again, we're going to make it so that this device will actually last 60 days before it challenges again. So during the holidays, if they didn't want to, they can go home. This device will always work. You've used it at school, it'll work at home. So we're kind of using the school as a bit of a proxy for our junior school students. They all have iPads, which is fantastic. We are looking at either doing passwordless on those iPads or token-based. We're still finalising that. We're still testing. Both work in theory. So both work technically. What we're now looking at is how it actually works. If we have tokens, do we attach them to the bags? Are we going to have actually issues where we have shared devices at home? How does that work? We're communicating with our parents and going through that. So we have technical solutions both ways. We're now just going through that whole change process and communicating with our parents to actually work out what's going to work there.
Thank you for that. We are going to wrap it up there because we're running out of time. So thank you very much all of you for being here on this panel. For any more questions that we didn't get to that you may want to ask, throw them on the Mitie forum, and obviously anyone can reply, but I know these four ladies and gentlemen here are very good and very happy to always be on, well not always, but be on the forum and respond. I'm also going to ask a quick question of you, and it's more a nod. Many of you in emails we had leading up to here mentioned some of the systems you are using, which you've mentioned in passing here. Are you happy to jump on the forum and even post some of those security products you're using so that those who didn't quite get the name can see it? Yeah, cool. Thank you. Look, thank you. Can you give them a round of applause for their time here? I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right. I'm now going to invite Tim up here, who's going to finish up the afternoon for us.
I'll take the wireless one, thank you. Well, what a great panel discussion. A lot of it's over my head. I work in the service desk, so, security, not really my thing. Kidding. But good one. Look, it has been a great day. Right now, we just want to give a bit of time to our sponsors. They are the ones that obviously foot the bill for things like food and, getting us in here, which is great. So I'll hand it over to Compass.
Thank you. I always feel like I should break out into song when I have a microphone. I will not. I have a wheel of names that for people that have come up and had a nice chat with us today. And we're giving away a set of Sennheiser HD 450 BT noise cancelling over-ear headphones. They didn't arrive in time, so I'll run them out to your school. So I'm just spinning. I don't know if you can hear that. Forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly. Surya from MLC. Hello. I don't have anything for you right here. I'll come to the school and I'll deliver them for you. Thanks for having us, everyone.
Okay, and I've got the Wheel of Death. Look at all of this. So, thank you for having Ed Smart here today. It's been really, really great. And we do have a winner, Jennifer Babbage, who will get this $250 spa voucher. Come on, Jennifer, I do actually have something here. Wonderful. Congratulations. There you go.
Thanks. Beautiful. Thank you. A couple of the other sponsors, had to duck off due to, getting back to work, getting flights, but they have given me some great information on what to pass on. So from Next Technology, we've done their spin, and their winner is Hayden McWilliams from St. Gregory's. Is he around? He's gone? Oh, well, I'll work out how to get that prize to him. That'll be great. And from Toddle, we'll spin our lovely Wheel of Death one more time. And they will be sending out the prize to Luke Charters. Is he here? Hey, that's good. I'll come and grab your information later, and I'll send it on to them for that. Thank you very much. Well, great. Well, look, that wraps up our day, everyone. Hopefully you've taken in a lot of knowledge. Your head hasn't exploded too much. But there are a few little thank yous that we do want to make. Obviously, for a day like this, it's a lot of work for the host school. So a big shout out to David Massa and Loreto. It is a really nice school. I do like that it's not too far away from my house, so travelling wasn't a problem. Other thank yous just really to the Mitie committee as a whole, but singling out Mike Parker and Fred Shue, who actually did a lot of the organising leading up to today. But overall as a committee, all kind of chipping in late night, early morning, throughout the day, lots of messages backwards and forwards trying to organise things. So it is definitely a lot of work, so big thank you for that. That's all part of it. It's fine. Give him a clap. Cool. And the last people to thank you are you guys for actually showing up on a very cold Sydney day. So thank you very much, and if not, we'll see you on the forum. And if you are available, there are post-event drinks at the Hornsby RSL. So if you are wanting to kick back, maybe have some early dinner, feel free, you can head that direction. For everyone that's got a lanyard, if everyone can see my friend Mike Smith, I haven't predetermined this, but he's the man with two hands up in the air. If everyone wants to give their lanyards just direct to him, that would be great on your way out.
Sorry, and just a quick thank you again for coming to Loreto. Really appreciate it being here and the sharing, and really the organising committee from Mitie have done a phenomenal job. My role was very much just to provide a venue and give a quick spiel this morning, but all the work was done by Mitie in terms of organising the sponsors, organising the agenda, organising the catering, even the streaming. It was all done. So, look, encourage other schools to follow that and join in the party. Really, it's great. So, once again, thank you to the Mitie committee, Fred, Mike, Tim, David, everybody here that's done a great job. Thank you. I think the easiest way out, because the schools are all rabbit warrens, if you head out those doors there, if you did park in the two car parks that were provided earlier, that's probably the quickest way, and just follow the road around and you'll get the car, and then keep heading out towards Mount Pleasant Avenue, and just be careful on the left and right turns at the top of the street.